You're saying that Israel needs to allow Hamas to stay there, who's been breaking international law of armed conflict for 20 years?
As opposed to Hamas allowing the Israeli government to stay there when they're breaking international law for even longer than that.
It's not peace. Nobody wants peace. People want justice.
Oops, it's just war. Gaza's unlivable anymore. Too bad it can't support Palestinian life. People are starving. It's just all an accident.
It's crazy that the numbers are so poor for a country that could kill so many more people. They're doing things that no other country's done. And there's a reason, by the way, which you will never recognize, why all of the surrounding Arab states have abandoned the Palestinians too, because their history has been one of violence, that first they've been encouraged by the surrounding nations and used by them, and then now they've been abandoned once the other nations have used them up.
That's a racist.
For Thursday night.
Racist?
Why is that racist?
Happy Friday, everyone, or Thursday night. If you're a premium subscriber, breakingpoints.com, if you want to get the show early to your inbox. I'm Emily Jashinsky, and you probably recognize the man sitting next to me. We're about to tee up a fascinating debate. I'm joined, of course, also by my co-host, my wonderful co-host, Ryan Grim. And these two gentlemen that you see here are not debating for the first time. They debated in the past. Maybe some of you have watched that. They sparred over the question of Israel actually earlier this year, and then kind of subsequently continued a bit of a back and forth. So we know that we're not going to settle the debate once and for all here today, but I think what we want to do, Ryan, is really push for more moral clarity, push for more contrast as we reflect on just this last week of absolutely historic protests rocking dozens of campuses across the country. So we have two popular proponents of the respective sides here, and we're excited to get into it.
Yeah, and to introduce them both, we've got to my right here, Omar Baddar. He's a Palestinian-American political analyst who's been following the situation in the Middle East for many, many years. On the other side, we have Stephen Bennell Jr., who's better known by his streaming name, Mr. Borelli, or whatever or by like a dozen different names. From if you guys watched the Norman Finkelstein debate, that kind of thrust Destiny as a streaming name into this conversation. So we want to start with the campus protest before getting to the war itself. This week saw a militarized response over at VCU, UT Austin, Columbia, and a vigilante response at UCLA. So just curious for your read in general on these protests as they've unfolded. And have you seen any double standard when it comes to kind of the free speech warriors that we've seen championing the cause of free expression on college campuses, now championing the cause of shooting fireworks into peaceful campus?
Yeah, it's the double standard is incredibly glaring. I mean, you would have to put on blinders to actually miss it. You have, I think that these student protesters are the conscience of this country. We are witnessing an absolutely horrific situation unfolding on the ground, and American policy is to insist on continuing to send endless weapons unconditionally to a military force that is mass slaughtering children by the tens of thousands. And these students are saying, we're taking a stand. This is not okay. If we can't impact the policy makers directly, we're going to make sure that our institutions and the money that we're paying to these institutions is not playing into this kind of mass slaughter. And what we witnessed, like from my perspective, in a better world, cops would be going after the people who are violating American law to make sure that weapons can continue slaughtering children, rather than going after people who are peacefully protesting, overwhelmingly peacefully protesting, in order to change that policy, change American investment in it. And you're absolutely right. You have a level of demonization of these protesters. Constantly talking about them as if, it's just like anti-Semitic mobs or whatever. The people leading these protests, there's a very significant portion of progressive young Jewish people who are the leaders in many cases of some of these protests. Groups from If Not Now and Jewish Voice for Peace and many others. And they are on the receiving end of tremendous hate and violence, and nobody talks about that. And as you mentioned, what we're witnessing in UCLA is absolutely horrifying. These protesters being attacked by bear spray and fireworks, and some of them being beaten up, and you see like some serious injuries. But because the climate in this country is one in which one side gets demonized, that empowers and emboldens the response, not just from police, but also from vigilantes. And I just want to note one last thing, just because Stephen is here, and I think it's really relevant, is there's a person that I know named Simone Zimmerman, who...
She's in town today for an Intercept event.
That's right. And she's one of the most conscientious and decent human beings that you'll ever meet. And she knows personal people in her life who have lost loved ones on October 7th from the attack that Hamas carried out. And she was horrified by that attack. And she's equally horrified by Israel's response and the mass slaughter. And she's one of those people who is fighting for a better future for Palestinians and Israelis. And she was at Passover Seder at Columbia, joining the protesters and talking about how beautiful it is that she's in that setup. And Stephen quote tweeted that tweet and said that he would like to donate thousands of gallons of kerosene, presumably so these people can set themselves on fire. And it's just such an ugly and distasteful thing to say. And I'm genuinely curious of what you're thinking when you tweet things like that.
If everybody celebrated Bushnell doing his protest, more people want to protest that way, then God help them, I guess.
Yeah, but this is not about Bushnell, though.
But let's keep going in response to that, because Omar set up an interesting juxtaposition here between anti-Semitic mobs and peaceful protesters. What we're seeing on these campuses anti-Semitic mobs, or is it peaceful protesters from your perspective, Stephen?
From my perspective, I mean, it really depends on which series of videos that you watch. I think from an American perspective, it really shouldn't matter if they're anti-Semitic mobs or if they're protesting foreign policy or whatever. In the United States, we don't have hate speech laws. You should be allowed to say really whatever you want in protest, assuming you're not violating any social or whatever the ordinances are. I know, like for some college campuses, you're not allowed to block pathways, or you can't protest if they've got events planned for graduations or whatever. And as long as you're not disrupting the peace in a way where you're like, you can't blow loudspeakers hitting on college campuses, as long as you're following the laws, you'll be able to protest however you want.
But if you are, say, what we saw from NYPD and LAPD actually last night, if you're violating laws, university rules even, with an encampment, if you broke into the hall like they did and have been barricaded up in there, what did you make of the NYPD response just at Columbia, for example?
I like to wait till the dust settles on this because I hear so many different things about how students were all being peaceful. I've seen obviously the videos of like some of the stuff being broken into. I think that when it comes to an analysis of how to respond to these particular events, I think that the start and stop needs to be what are the rules and regulations in place, because a lot of people will jump in and start arguing, well, it's a public area, so they can be wherever they want or do whatever they want without even understanding the rules and regulations in place. I think as a blanket rule, I don't know why this particular situation would need any kind of unique analysis. It would be the same as all protests. If you're in a private college, I understand they can remove you whenever they want. It's private property. If you're in a state-funded or public university, then there are certain areas that are supposed to remain open to the public, and they can't remove you unless you are not there in an ordinary manner if you're disrupting some other event. I don't see anything about these particular set of protests that would call for any type of unique analysis that escapes like that fundamental rule to protests in the United States. Yeah.
And your fundamental rule then to quote tweet with the kerosene.
I thought it was insane.
Are you agnostic on if the raid was justified? So I don't really give a fuck. I don't care. It's a super simple, like fact-based, like if they're breaking rules, kick them out. If not, then don't. That's it. It's so simple. It's such a boring question. So boring, so stupid, so pointless. Don't give a fuck. There's nothing unique about any of these situations, about any other types of protests. There's literally nothing at all.
You had delusional people, especially young children in the United States, that don't know any part of this conflict whatsoever, which is probably the vast majority of people protesting it. That people are celebrating people setting themselves on fire. That is just unbelievable to me. You saw a guy do it in front of, I think, one of the New York City courthouses for the Trump stuff. You saw the Aaron Bushnell guy do it for who knows what reason. I guess because he thought the whole world wasn't already paying attention to this issue. And yeah, the idea of people ever celebrating themselves in a democratic first world country, setting themselves on fire for an issue that already has an unlimited amount of international attention, is unbelievably stupid to me.
Yeah, but how does it relate to this particular instance? I mean, this is a bunch of Jewish students celebrating with pro-Palestinian students over Passover and talking about a climate in which they're coming together. Like, why did you decide to drag the Bushnell thing into this? That's
one. I think it's funny when people disingenuously load phrases like, "Oh, all the Jewish people are protesting with these people. There are so many Jewish people." That's not true. The last Pew Research thing I saw, I think, for 2023, shows that like 90% of people who are Jewish support the existence of Israel. So the idea that there's this huge group of Israeli who are Jewish people.
Yeah, this is not about the existence of Israel. There's no question about the fact that so many of these protest leaders are in fact Jewish. These groups, they're not imaginary. They're not a figment of your imagination. You can actually go see them and look at how large their gatherings are, how loud their voices have been. The people who are getting arrested in Congress, so many of them are progressive Jewish organizations that are leading this effort. This is not about some broader, what are the views of American Jews about the existence of Israel. We're just
what are the protests about?
The protests are about ending the slaughter of the children of Gaza. That's what the protests are about.
Like?
What do you mean, what does it look like?
What is the end condition of the it's not just ending the slaughter, it's also stopping the blockade, it's also reaching a just resolution to the Palestinian conflict, it's also probably the unlimited right of return of 6 million refugees, it's probably the dissolution of Israel as a Jewish majority state, it's probably what all does that entail?
You're conflating a ton of different things. A lot of these protesters have varying views about this. Some of them support a two-state solution, some of them support a one-state solution, but what's bringing everybody together in this moment is a realization that what Israel is doing to Gaza is absolutely unconscionable, that you slaughter people at that scale, that Israel is clearly waging a war on the civilian population of Gaza. That's what these people are upset about, and they want it to come to an end.
And the specific thing that they're protesting, and maybe we could actually find something to agree on here, because I've seen you describe yourself as kind of a moderate who like tries to balance the extremists on each side here. So the specific thing the protesters are arguing for at all of these different campuses is opening up the books of basically the hedge funds that run their universities and divesting from firms that are either linked to the war in Gaza or linked to Israel. More generally, Brown University reached an agreement with its protesters that they would abandon their encampment in exchange for a vote in October to divest from that. That gets to the question of resistance and the right to resistance. And so for years, it has been the kind of policy of the right here and a lot of the center here in the United States to make it illegal, to try to ban people from participating in boycotts or divestment efforts or lobbying for sanctions against Israel. At the same time, you say, well, armed resistance is clearly off the table. So if you rule out both, you only leave people with one option. So even if you don't support boycotting or divesting from Israel, do you support the right of people here in the United States to
I would have to check the explicit for how states have banned some of the BDS participation as a fundamental right to boycott. I think in the United States you should always have the right to boycott everything except for our currency. I think you have the right to boycott whatever you want. I don't know why that should ever be made illegal, but I know that there are particular things
look at that
BDS stuff that I think states look at. But yeah, of course, you should always have the right. I wish that the people that would talk about conditioning support for Israel, though, would also talk about conditioning support for Palestine, because they are some of the highest recipients of aid in the world per capita. The United States contributes a lot of that aid. It's interesting to me that it seems like we're always talking about how we need to condition aid to Israel.
Congratulations, Congress just banned all funding of UNRWA. So.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
Well, so actually, because Stephen raised an interesting point that what's the kind of end goal of the protesters after BDS in the service of what? What does that look like?
It's a one-state solution where Jews are the minority.
Well, so you said earlier that it sort of depends on whatever video you're looking at that this is an anti-Semitic mob or peaceful protesters, and I think that's actually true. There's videos showing all kinds of different things, which is part of the issue of piecing together these stories via social media. So if the one-state solution is kind of the ultimate goal of the people that are protesting for BDS, what is your do you think they're fundamentally anti-Semitic? Do you think they're fundamentally, are they, from your perspective, just mistaken, misguided, or are they bigoted?
I don't care. Trying to sort out the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is almost impossible, and in practice the two look almost identical sometimes. So the obsession of trying to figure out what is the driving thing here between anti-Semitism versus anti-Zionism. I think in some cases it's good to find differences. So some people are discriminatory against poor people, some people are discriminatory against certain races of people, and figuring out the difference here is really important. When it comes to anti-Semitism versus anti-Zionism in regards to Israel, I think that the talking points of somebody who's an anti-Zionist are indistinguishable from the talking points of somebody who is anti-Semitic. So I don't know.
There are a lot of Israelis who don't support the Netanyahu policy.
That's not anti-Zionism such that they want a one-state solution. Even Palestinians don't want a one-state solution.
Omar, do you want to respond?
Yeah, it's utterly grotesque to conflate those two things. Opposition to Zionism is opposition to the state of Israel, the way it came into being at the expense of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who were driven out of their homes. And there's a different vision, that instead of having a Jewish state that privileges one particular group of people over another, that you have a vision for a state in which everybody is equal. Americans would be familiar with what that vision actually looks like. You remember the era of Jim Crow and what that meant, and people who are demanding a different kind of country in which everybody is equal. That's not the same as being anti-white. It's absurd to even put these remotely in the same category.
Can I
just if I can finish just on the point of BDS. BDS also, by the way, has been clear about the fact that they don't take any particular political solution. It does certainly happen that a lot of BDS activists do support a one-state solution, but that is not the position of BDS itself as a movement that is calling for boycotts and isolation. And just on the free speech angle, you have states all over the country that are passing laws that basically make it punishable to boycott.
How are you conflating things by saying it's hard to disentangle? I don't understand how that makes any sense. What are you saying? That sentence didn't make any sense. Wait, what?
Not just Israel, but Israeli settlements that are built in the occupied territories. And those settlements are war crimes under international law. And so you have a situation in which this country, part of its founding is that we celebrate boycotts of, as part of deep entrenched part of American culture, the boycott of British trade during the founding of the country, the Montgomery.
Oh, never mind. I understand. Never mind. You're repeating my bad. Don't worry about it.
Boycott during the civil rights movement. And now you're saying that boycotting the war crimes of a foreign country is somehow punishable. People being denied the ability to work with state governments or schools or medical facilities or anything that is affiliated with the state. Those are transparently unconstitutional laws. They have been challenged by organizations like the ACLU. They have been defeated in court in many cases. But unfortunately, they keep popping up faster than the rate at which you can challenge them. And that's a serious crisis. Anybody who's serious about being committed to free speech and saying that Americans should be able to exercise the right to boycott, including when it comes to Israel or Israel's atrocities, that's an absolutely critical issue that we're not talking enough about, that you have the power of the state being used to silence people's right to free speech. And I think that's a really important angle.
I want to move to the conduct of the war by Israel pretty soon. But on the one state versus two state question, isn't it the case that the current Israeli government position is one state? Like there's a complete rejection across the board.
River to the sea.
Of a Palestinian state, river to the sea. So
yeah, I would say I think the Likud platform has essentially always said as much. Yeah.
Right. So okay, so more agreement. Like you oppose that. You think that.
I oppose it. He's in favor of the one state where the Jews live as a minority in that state.
Yeah. No. Just to be clear, the Netanyahu government and the Likud are in favor of a one state in which Jews are privileged over Palestinians, with Palestinians occupying multi-tiers. If you're a citizen of Israel, you have a certain amount of rights. If you're in the West Bank, you get this many rights. And if you're in Gaza, you're completely under siege, and there's nothing that you can do.
Which is every country. You've described every country.
My vision of a one state.
Usually have more rights than non-citizens.
Yeah. Well, in those countries, you don't permanently occupy those people and prevent them from having any rights and deny them citizenship as well. And that's the fundamental problem, is that Israel's vision is Palestinians can never be free. They can't get their own state and they can't live as equals within Israel. So your status is just to be permanently occupied and helpless without rights. And that's a vision that I think is absolutely nobody who has a conscience can actually support. And my vision of a one state would be one in which everybody actually has equal rights and everybody can live equally, precisely the way that we live in the United States.
Which is a really fun position to take in the West when we have no stake in the game. I think it's fun to scream that at protests. I think it's fun to go on Twitter and do that. I think at the end of the day, that type of rhetoric is ultimately destructive to Palestinians because everybody knows that that's never happening. It's a pipe dream. Less than 30% of Palestinians are in favor of a singular state where Jews and Arabs have the exact same rights. Literally nobody wants that. People in Israel don't want that. It's literally you're just virtue signaling and paying lip service to an idea that is grossly unpopular across the entirety of Israel and Palestine. Not only that, the idea that you would have a singular state created where 6 million Palestinian refugees are then brought back into the state. There's no shot that any Jewish person living there who has lived through the Second Intifada, who has lived through Hamas attacks, who has lived through Hezbollah attacks, who's lived through international support for Houthi attacks, is going to feel safe in such a state. And they know that there would be absolutely no international support for them if that state were created and Jews were to start getting slaughtered en masse there.
Yes.
Let's toss it to Omar with that for a response. And also, I'll sort of add to that, maybe to narrow it down a little bit. What is then, let's say, hypothetically, we take the best faith argument, not from Netanyahu, but let's say an Israeli citizen who's both concerned about their safety and concerned about Netanyahu's leadership. What does the path towards peace from the perspective of an Israeli? What does it look like when they see the level of support for Hamas? And we can obviously get into why so many people in Palestine.
What is your take on RFK Jr.'s notes? But I have no takes on RFK. He's entirely irrelevant. It is a joke candidate. I don't know why anybody ever asked me questions about him. I have no takes on RFK. He's not a serious person. And nobody that follows him is serious about anything relating to politics. I don't care. I have no thoughts or cares whatsoever about RFK. Please stop asking me questions about him. Holy shit. I do not care. I do not care at all. Jesus.
feel like they need to support Hamas.
Yeah, no,
go ahead.
in a way, you're putting your finger on the problem precisely. I mean, Israel is upset that there's so much hostility towards them, but the reason there's so much hostility is because of the way that they have treated Palestinians for decade after decade. Just the level of brutality that Palestinians have experienced under occupation has been absolutely horrific. And, you know, when you talk about the prospects for peace, there was a time in which Palestinians recognized that there's a significant power differential, that they can't actually get freedom from the river to the sea in their own homeland. And there was an indulgence of the idea that maybe we can have a two-state compromise in which Palestinians would only get the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, which is about 1/5 of the entire territory of their historic homeland, and Israel gets to keep the other 4/5. That, from Palestinians' perspective, is a massive Palestinian compromise, bending over backwards to facilitate some kind of two states. And all what Israel was required to do is not grant Palestinians some sort of favor, but simply comply with international law by withdrawing from the occupied territories. They're obligated to do that anyway. The occupied territories do not belong to Israel. And during this period, Palestinian support for peace with Israel was skyrocketed. Public opinion showed that there's significant support for a two-state solution. Support for Hamas way down, even though Hamas was trying to destabilize the situation at the time, committing acts of violence. They did not enjoy any support among Palestinians. It is only when it became clear that Israel has no interest whatsoever in allowing Palestinians to have a state, and spent the entire so-called peace process building more and more and more settlements, just expanding them throughout the occupied Palestinian territories, where Palestinians saw the prospect for a Palestinian state shrinking by the day on the ground. They understood that this entire process was a sham, and the fact that Israeli restrictions were increasing, Israeli violence was ongoing, it became clear that this was not going to be a path in which Palestinians can get a real state. And that's when you got the shift in public opinion back in terms of supporting for armed resistance as the only way, because clearly Israel could not be talked into seeing Palestinians as equal human beings and granting them.
But then what now?
Well, a shorter version maybe for Stephen to respond to is that the way to defeat Hamas is through peace, not war. What's wrong with that?
It sounds really brutal, but the issue is that the unlimited amount of international support for the Palestinians means the Palestinians will never look to peace. They shouldn't. They always have an unlimited reservoir internationally of people who will encourage the delusions that if they continue to fight, they're going to get a better deal. It's the reason why they walked away in 2000 from Camp David. It's the reason why they walked away from the Taba Summit. It's the reason why Abbas walked away in 2008 from Ulmurt. It's the reason why the Oslo Accords were never negotiated in 93. That period of violence that he's talking about from 93 to 2000, where the Israelis were continuing to expand settlements into the West Bank, is true, but Palestinians also continue to engage in terrorist activities. A lot of people didn't trust Arafat because Arafat would sign on to a deal for the Oslo Accords, and then he would go over to Switzerland and he'd make speeches in universities about how, like, yeah, we agree to this now, but, you know, we're going to get them as soon as we get a little bit, we're going to take more, which is ironically what they've accused Israel of doing for the past 100 years. I think that in order for this conflict to actually start to reach some kind of resolution, I think that, again, it sounds mean, but Palestinians need to feel like they have something at stake. And it looks like they do, but in reality, politically, Palestinians have never lost anything because people continue to make them feel as though they can always go back to borders that existed 80 years ago. People will constantly say, you just said it here, what's the fair thing? They only want a sliver of this land, 1/5 of the territory. Yeah, they tried like 3, 4, 5 different wars to get more, and they lost. You can't continue to go back to the first try over and over and over again and demand the deal that was on the table before. You walked away from the partition plan in 47. You can't go to war 5 times and then keep going back to another set of borders. They're always one generation behind when it comes to accepting some type of actual peace deal. So as long as Palestinians have people like Omar internationally that will support them in an unlimited delusion to fight forever, Palestinians will never try to accept this. And they shouldn't. They really should. There's no reason to.
So, but Omar, just what, in one sense, if you have public polling that shows some 70%, this was from a Palestinian polling firm in December, 72% supported what happened on October 7th. So, and we can talk about why, and we will, I'm sure. So with all of that said, what now? What if if you were in charge of Israeli foreign policy in a hypothetical sense? And I think this will be a response to what Stephen just said. What happens now to get to a position where, to your point, there can be justice?
I'm happy to address that, but I have to go back to a particular point. The idea that Palestinians are rejectionists because they have so much international support, I think, is just thoroughly absurd. Palestinians are paying an unbelievable cost every single day. Their lives are completely brutalized under occupation, and the idea that they see no cost to continuing to fighting on forever is just completely ridiculous. It's detached from reality. It's as if you're unaware of what Palestinian conditions are under Israeli occupation. The reason why they were willing to bend over backwards, I mean, if you look at the history of negotiations, you look at the Palestine papers that got leaked shortly after, I think back in the mid-2000s, it's obvious that Palestinians were bending over backwards to try to make that deal work. And Israel insisted on expanding more and more settlements. And yes, you can say that Palestinian violence was ongoing at the time, but so was Israeli violence. I mean, the attack that happened on the mosque in Hebron, where nearly 30 Palestinians were killed by a Jewish terrorist named Baruch Goldstein, that happened during the so-called peace process. And Israel responded by putting Palestinians in Hebron under curfew to prevent any possible retaliation. Those are the conditions, but nobody looks at that incident and says, oh, well, there was Israeli violence, therefore the Israelis, we're not, that's the reason why they can't.
All over Israeli history. There was a massacre in Hebron in 29 where a bunch of Palestinian Arabs killed.
The point I'm making is that this is besides the point, that yes, we can point to individual atrocities, and that does not change the fact that throughout the peace process, if Israel were genuinely interested in allowing for a Palestinian state to exist, they would not have spent the entire so-called peace process taking up more and more and more of the West Bank. So it's the disingenuous nature of Israeli policy that's the reason why this is a problem. Now, to your point of what now?
Yeah, I was going to say they are genuinely interested in the peace process, and you're in charge.
Yeah.
What do they do?
Right now, we have a situation, right? There is a problem of the fact that the overwhelming majority of Palestinians support groups like Hamas, you have a majority of people in Israel, overwhelming majority, support the most vicious policies of the Netanyahu.
Why did you say Israel has never done anything wrong? You paid off permaban. See ya. You haven't listened to a single thing I've said. Nice try though.
Government and just carrying on, and they think that they're not going far enough in Gaza and so on. And that just, it's important to know that hatred is a symptom of the conflict and not the cause of it. People get this stuff backwards. When you think of apartheid in South Africa, there was plenty of hostility. And we eventually had a reconciliation process between white and black people in South Africa, but only after apartheid fell. That's when you can have reconciliation. But the idea that you can try to work on how people feel about each other in the midst of one side occupying the other, controlling every aspect of their lives and brutalizing them day in and day out, there's no surprise that there are hostile feelings. And yes, when Palestinians do respond with violence, Israelis who are out of touch with the reasons why all of this is happening are going to develop hostile feelings as well. This is a moment in which the international community has to step in. This is not about making Israelis and Palestinians like each other right now. This is about making sure that one side does not get to dominate the other until the end of time. And the status quo leading up to October 7th is one in which Israel dominated every aspect of Palestinian life. So you can say, yes, both sides hate each other, but one side is in charge of everything. One side gets to decide whether they want to put the people of Gaza on a diet, as they were talking about, when they first imposed the siege on Gaza. Just Palestinians don't get to decide how much food Israelis get. They don't get to demolish Israeli homes at will whenever they feel like it. They don't get to humiliate Israelis at checkpoints day in and day out. So because there's a dynamic in which one side is imposing an illegal occupation over another people and taking over their land, that has to come to an end, and you can bring it to an end through international pressure, primarily from the United States as the country that has the most.
Without knowing anything about the conflict, I feel like these people are just are just lying to destiny when they compare this conflict to South Africa. The comparison to Africa, it was an intentional Palestinian strategy that I don't know if the Soviets encouraged it or if Arafat encouraged it or what, but a lot of the people in Palestine started to fashion themselves. First, it was off of Algeria, as the Algerians fought off France and basically kicked the colonization efforts out of there. And then it was after South Africa. There was a very intentional Palestinian strategy in the 70s relating to this idea. When did the French colonization or occupation or whatever of Algeria end? Regardless, I know that there were a lot of comparisons to independence in 62, so 60s, 70s. There's a lot of comparisons to stuff going on in Africa for the Palestinian stuff.
Leverage over Israel to say not another penny until that occupation ends. And when that occupation comes to an end, we can talk about sorting out the exact specifics of how we get more conciliation and cooperation between Palestinians and Israelis.
And when it comes to international support for Palestinians, there's one side that has had the international support of the world's great superpower, and the political and military support as well, Israel.
What about the Soviet Union supporting the Arab states?
The Soviet Union has had a very complicated relationship.
To be clear, the Soviet Union
also, the Soviet Union has
Arab
not.
States before.
I hated that answer. God, what a weak answer. Well, it's complicated. God, that was so cringe.
Soviet Union.
God, that triggered the fuck out of me.
Support as well, Israel.
What about the Soviet Union supporting the Arab states?
The Soviet Union has had a very complicated relationship.
To be clear, the Soviet Union
also, the Soviet Union has
the Arab
not.
States before the United States didn't truly start supporting Israel until about 66, 67.
The Soviet Union also hasn't been here since
That's
1991.
true, but the conflict also didn't start after the 91, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But
the point is that Israel is
Why would he try to do this to me? Oh, that drove me crazy. Well, the Soviet Union collapsed. Okay, yeah, and what? Israel didn't start in 1991? What a bizarre fucking thing to say. Ugh.
a lot of agency, and Benjamin Netanyahu in particular, as the prime minister for most of the last 25, 30 years, has had an extraordinary amount of agency as well. And I wanted to read to you a piece of an essay published in Haaretz recently by Israeli historian Yuval Noah Harari. He writes, given the murderous nature of Hamas, this time its allies gave Israel free rein for many months to conquer Gaza, liberate the Israeli hostages, change the situation in the Strip according to Israel's best judgment, and create a new order in the region. The Netanyahu government wasted this historic opportunity and also wasted the bravery and dedication of the soldiers of the IDF. The Netanyahu government failed to exploit its battlefield victories to reach an agreement on the release of all the hostages and to advance an alternative political order in Gaza. Instead, it decided to knowingly inflict on Gaza an unnecessary humanitarian disaster, and in so doing, inflicted on Israel an unnecessary political disaster. One by one, our allies have become horrified by what is happening in Gaza, and one by one, they are calling for an immediate ceasefire and even for a weapons embargo on Israel. Even during the worst moments of October 7th, Hamas was nowhere near vanquishing Israel. But the ruinous policy of the Netanyahu government following October 7th has placed Israel in existential danger. So when I ask you, it seems like a pretty fundamental irony that if Israel had listened to critics like Omar and myself after October 7th, who warned against enacting violence just for the purposes of revenge and potentially for ethnic cleansing of Gaza, they would ironically and paradoxically be in a much stronger global strategic political position.
One of the bad things that Israel has done, that Destiny has criticized, I don't really follow all the streams, but every time I tune in, it seems he feels like the Palestinians are mostly at fault. Because right now I think they are mostly at fault. Just because they're mostly at fault doesn't mean Israel hasn't done bad things. I mean, bad things since when? I mean, like, from what point? Like, I think that Israel wasn't aware of the political realities of their neighbors, so sometimes they were a little bit too harsh when they could have probably found alliances, especially with Jordan prior to the 67 war. There were times when Israel's reprisals over in the West Bank were too harsh for King Hussein not to respond. I think that's probably the reason why he got sucked into the war, the Six-Day War. After 67, Israel didn't try hard enough to actually pursue peace, even though there probably was an opportunity to do it. Saddam himself was delivering peace overtures to Golda Meir, and she literally shot them down because Israel was literally high off their own fucking supply after winning in 67. After 73, once peace talks began between Egypt and between Israel, and the Palestinians got kicked out of that negotiation, I think that Begin's approach to peace with the Middle East in terms of his like capsule diplomacy, where he thought he could isolate every single individual Middle Eastern country, was correct in practice, but it was wrong in theory, in that it worked, but it didn't actually solve the Palestinian problem, which they thought would just go away. That never ended up actually happening. There are probably times where peace could have been pursued with Syria, but I think Rabin walked away from it because he just wasn't confident. And by the time he reapproached it later on, the Syrian leadership was, I think Hafez was basically on his deathbed, and he just wanted to make sure that the country would pass nicely into Syria. So Israel missed an opportunity there. I think that expansion into the West Bank has completely, totally fucked Israel's ability to like make a lasting peace with the Palestinians, because now they're going to have to withdraw hundreds of thousands of settlers to ever actually seal the deal on that land. I think that Israel probably needs to start pursuing peace deals, big peace deals, when their prime ministers are already so like politically fragile, or they need to have like a little bit more time before the end of their administration, because apparently whoever you're negotiating with on the Palestinian side is going to take longer and longer and longer to negotiate until your term expires, and then it'll go the next thing. I think that Israel, I mean, I don't know, there's, I don't know, there's a ton of criticisms. What do you mean? There's criticism from both sides. Kill yourself in a video game.
Than they are now, where they're facing not just isolation, but charges before the ICJ and potentially before the ICC. So are they making a mistake in following kind of the more bellicose advice that they're getting from their so-called allies?
That's a touching essay. Who was the alternative order politically besides Hamas that would have risen up in the Gaza Strip? If there was an alternative political order, I would love to hear it. Even in the West Bank, there's a reason why Abbas suspended elections 20 years ago. Even in the West Bank, Hamas enjoys pretty broad support.
I mean, there are answers to this question. It's not rhetorical. Do you want to take that?
I mean,
well, also, hold on, wait. Well, before he does, also to elaborate a bit on the military objectives, I think Hamas needs to go. I don't think that there's any future that happens where Israel can negotiate anything, whether it's peace or war, with Hamas remaining as the government in the Gaza Strip. I don't think any of the surrounding Arabs...
Ryan, I just realized I didn't want to give him a chance to yap. I wanted to say sure. I think Ryan threw that over to Omar because he had no clue how to answer that question, and Omar had no clue either. Fuck, wait, well, who do we put besides Hamas? I just realized that. Oh, shit.
Even in the West Bank, Hamas enjoys pretty broad support.
I mean, there are answers to this question. It's not rhetorical. Do you want to take that?
I mean,
well, also, hold on, wait. Well, before he does,
there is no answer to that question. What?
Also to elaborate a bit on the military objectives, I think Hamas needs to go. I don't think that there's any future that happens where Israel can negotiate anything, whether it's peace or war, with Hamas remaining as the government in the Gaza Strip. I don't think any of the surrounding Arab states wanted Hamas to remain as the government in the Gaza Strip. It's a disaster. You've had a series of conflicts. In 2008, you had Gazled. 2014, you had Protective Edge. 2018, you had the response to the Great March of Return. And now in 2023, you had a massive attack on October 7th. The idea that you would just allow them to stay here after spending at least a year preparing for what was probably, I think, the single largest day of violence against Jews since the Holocaust, that's an untenable position. I don't think a single other country or person in all of human history would be asked to keep a government like that in place.
Can we pause for 1 second on the quote response to the Great March of Return? For people who don't know, the Great March of Return was a civil society-led Gaza initiative that was a nonviolent demonstration where every Friday people
it is crazy to me listening to these shows now. This is why I don't trust anybody on anything. The only reason I know every single thing is because I've read every single fucking document that comes up in this debate. If I hadn't read any of this, I would just assume it's true. Is there a single true thing being said anywhere? Like, wait, what? This is an unbelievable summary.
Civil society-led Gaza initiative that was a nonviolent demonstration where every Friday people would meet and kind of march to the fence, symbolically gazing out at land that they had lost over the years. The IDF responded by killing a pretty significant amount of Palestinians, but also maiming, I believe, tens of thousands, to the point where the UN put out a report noting that it had become commonplace to see people walking around with one leg, missing an arm. There were IDF soldiers who said, we were told shoot out the legs. One guy said he hit like 40 plus legs like in a single day. Hamas.
By the way, those quotes, the two that I could find, one had to do with Ariel Sharon telling, I think it was when he was, was it Prime Minister during the Second Intifada shooting legs? I think it was Sharon. There might have been one during the Great March of Return. Those things are in response to like, don't kill them, don't headshot and blow them up, just shoot their legs or something. It's basically the thing being said. But now that's presented as being like too harsh and too evil. Like, oh, you're shooting out legs? That's horrible. It's like, okay, well the alternative was that they blow their brains out. Okay, I mean, like, what the fuck do you want?
Opposed this at the start because it was nonviolent, because it was civil society led. Hamas eventually caved under public pressure and ended up supporting the Great March of Return, which I think goes to your question: what is the political order that can replace Hamas? If there is a nonviolent movement that can gain traction, then Hamas is defeated by that. Hamas is pressured into supporting that just by the kind of public support for it, like happened with the Great March of Return. The Israeli response was not to say, wow, let's embrace this nonviolent civil society-led movement and marginalize Hamas and reach a deal with this Palestinian force that could even see a unification between the West Bank and Gaza toward a long-term peaceful solution. It was, let's annihilate this. Let's shoot and kill and maim the peaceful protesters, which only then fortifies Hamas's position and allows them to say that we were right all along. We told you can't deal with Israel. We warned you against this, that violence is the only way forward.
That was a fantastic retelling that is almost entirely fictional for the Great March of Return. It did start off as a generally peaceful protest. The idea behind the March of Return was returning to Israel.
That's an invasion!
The UN has released a report where they've gone over a lot of the shootings. It's very curious that if you actually read the entire report, you'll notice that almost every single shooting happens between 50 to 100 meters in range, which is curious. Why, if these are, because I was told, I believe by, I think Finkelstein himself said, or it might have been Rabbani, that this was a crack team of Israeli snipers, but apparently their rifles only worked up to 100 meters. The reason why
maybe they're just lazy.
Or maybe the reason why is because there is a no-go zone between the fence and 100 meters, because when people get too close, people try to cut the fence open, people try to break through it, which is what was happening towards the end of the
They had no choice but to shoot all those unarmed people.
It doesn't matter if you're armed or unarmed. If you're approaching an area that you're not supposed to be in, and then when people start to try to break through the fence, that's the rules of the border. If you try to cross any militarized border, you're probably going to get shot at. Also, towards the end of the Great March of Return, there were people that were throwing stones, that were sending over incendiary balloons, that were causing like fires to spread on the other side of the fence. All of this is documented.
God, I laid that trap. I laid the throwing stone trap, and they didn't bite because they were going to go throwing stones. One of the people that got killed in the Great March of Return got hit by a stone from friendly fire, by the way. I think the sling slung the stone and hit the dude in the head, in the back of the head, and fucking killed him, but nobody ate on that one.
By the UN, and that was when the majority of the firing from the Israeli police happened. If you want to say that they shouldn't be shooting at people who were close to the fence because you don't like that policy or whatever, that's fine. But characterizing that as like just open firing into a bunch of innocent people that are standing there with the goal of just maiming people for no reason is the most unbelievable retelling of what happened towards the end of that event.
That's exactly what happened, actually.
Just to characterize it.
Well, that's exactly what happened. Oh, and he realizes, oh shit, I haven't read anything about it. I've only read the wiki.
Just get a even more complete picture. Israeli policy is people in Gaza have no right to go in and out of the cage that they've been placed into. They're under complete siege. Their economy is in shambles because Israel does not allow them to trade with the outside world. They can't have an airport because...
Also, this guy yaps on every random point. Now, I noticed this. It was too late towards the end. Or I think I started talking more towards the end. He doesn't actually respond to anything I say ever. He just has it's like all the talking points loaded up or whatever.
Israel doesn't feel like they are entitled to an airport, can't have a seaport.
During these debates, do you think you're fighting for one side or are you trying to approach the truth? I mean, because they're on one side so much, like it comes off as I'm on one side. I try to kind of like center it towards the end here, and I think I do. I guess we'll find out when I rewatch. Let me go grab a Red Bull. Use the restroom 1 second. Also, fuck the goatee haters, okay? Listen, I think it's coming back. Barely? Not barely, actually. I think they're finally turning black again. Hopefully, like within a month, they'll all be alive again. I don't know, my immune system hated my hair follicles. Listen, we're coming back, okay? It's almost here.
When you look at the rates of unemployment, over 50% in Gaza at the time, and if those people who are trapped in this cage come a little too close to the border, then we open fire at them and kill them, even when they're unarmed, because that's border policy. If this is something that
it's more than 6,000 according to the UN, quote unquote, more than 6,000 unarmed demonstrators.
My favorite part was when you got a laugh from what's her name for saying Omar was going to use the Finkelstein method of being wrong about everything. Oh yeah.
Were shot by military. It's more than 6,000 according to the UN, quote unquote, more than 6,000 unarmed demonstrators were shot by military snipers week after week at the protest sites by the separation fence.
There's no denying that, yes, some people try to open up and some people sent incendiary balloons over the border and so on, but
at least we admit that. Thank you. The incendiary balloons of the peaceful protesters. Thank you.
by and large, when you look at the cases, human rights organizations have been clear about the fact that people were targeted when they posed absolutely no threat to Israeli soldiers. So Israeli soldiers opened fire on people and targeted specifically medics and journalists and children and people who are disabled in wheelchairs.
There's a very clever game that's being played when we say pose no threat to Israeli soldiers. There was one UN report that came out that analyzed it, that claimed that every single shooting except for one was unjustified. But the way that they got that is they didn't analyze that as an armed conflict. They analyzed that as a policing event. And when you analyze things internationally as a policing event, typically police aren't allowed to shoot or kill anybody unless they pose a direct threat to the individual.
Yeah.
Why would it be analyzed as an armed conflict if one side wasn't armed?
Because Hamas was present.
But they weren't shooting. They weren't.
It doesn't matter if they were shooting. If you've got an enemy, military.
And now they're pulling the destiny. I like this. There are 2 or 3 times I think in this debate where Grim goes to his laptop to find an answer to correct me, and you know what? They couldn't. They couldn't correct me, and they even told me that you have to leave your bag outside. They didn't even want me to bring my iPad in. They didn't realize. Okay, I've memorized everything. All my notes are in my brain. I don't need an iPad. I don't need a laptop. I don't need notes. Okay.
It's because Hamas was present.
But they weren't shooting.
It doesn't matter if they were shooting. If you've got an enemy military that is present amongst people that are performing actions that are
there was not a military.
Hamas is considered the oppositional force, and if you've got people that are participating,
and if you don't have guns at the time,
doesn't matter if you have guns or not.
Of course,
guns
it
have
does.
nothing to do with being
international humanitarian law is
force.
absolutely clear about the fact that a situation you can only kill combatants if they're in combat and they're armed. You can't find somebody.
That is absolutely not true. You do not become oyster combat. You do not all of a sudden gain the protections of a civilian if you're an enemy combattant without a gun. That is absolutely
if you happen to go home, of course you do. You should familiarize yourself with international humanitarian law.
Enemy combatant, Google IHL.
Yes, let's do that. But just to go back to a point that you made earlier about sort of.
Hold on, just to be clear. I just want to so you're saying that like if there's a military and you're fighting the enemy, and you guys are going to lose. If you just drop your guns, you can just like run back and nobody can shoot you.
Yes, if you drop your guns and raise your arms, you can't be shot anymore.
No, that's surrendering. That's different than running away. You can't drop your guns and just run away and you can't get shot because you have no firearms.
If you're a military threat at the time, it's a military engagement.
That's not true. That is absolutely not true.
Okay, I just see.
Ryan's fact-checking.
We can have a control room look this up. You're
wrong.
Look it up. I'll tell you what to Google.
That's a level of detail. Again, you start like playing up imaginary scenarios of somebody shooting at you and then dropping their gun and turning around.
No, but that's what your rule would lead to. We have to be able to analyze. Like, this is the problem. We can't even acknowledge like the basic realities of armed conflict.
This brings up a really fundamental reality, actually, because Omar was talking about airports and the seaports, and I think we all agree it would be miserable to live in a territory that doesn't have an airport, doesn't have a seaport.
It's a mistake when you impugn the sincerity of your opponents and snicker, even when they attack you personally and make hypocritical points. Win the war of optics. It's your main Achilles heel. I disagree. I think that there's always some of you on both sides that will like see things. If I'm too aggressive, you say it's bad. If I'm too passive, you say it's bad. I'm going to strike a more aggressive balance in these debates when it's basically, I'll say, I'm not going to say 3v1 because Emily never sided against me, but it's at the very least like a pretty decent 2v1. Okay. I'm not going to let people like make like completely wrong points and then not get called out on it. And then also like imply that I'm racist and then go to Twitter afterwards and shit on me and like be totally cordial during the debate. No, fuck no. I came into this with the goal of taking a slightly more aggressive position, and that was my goal, and I think I did, and I'm happy with that. I'm fine with that. I think I'd even said as much. Less hedging, more certainty with factual disagreements, more aggressive than general conversations, trying to respond to everything, incredibly firm with factual foundations for claims, force them to acknowledge when I made a correct point. That's what I just did there. I was like, hold on, wait a second. When you drop a gun, you think you just don't get shot anymore? Forcing them to take strong positions. I don't think we've gotten to that part yet. No, this is my goal of coming to this. I'm fine with that. I'm like, no, fuck you.
The argument from Israel and supporters of Israel is that if you put an airport in Gaza, Hamas would immediately seize it and use it to use the technologies to kill Israelis.
Yeah, and nobody asks if you have an airport in Israel, will the Israeli government use it to import weapons from the United States that they then use to kill Palestinians? You see, there's an inequality here that we never really acknowledge.
And I don't think that's unfair. I just mean, so what is like now? What is the path to creating a Gaza that can have an airport?
Do we think Hamas would use the airport and the seaport to bring in weapons?
I have no doubt that they would, exactly in the same way the Israeli government imports weapons and commits massive atrocities. Their terrorism against Palestinians.
What can people in Palestine do to create a situation where that's not, and what can people in Israel do, frankly, to create a situation that's different?
No, and to Stephen's earlier point, that which we did not address, is like, he thinks the goal of removing Hamas from power is absolutely essential, and you've got to do it. First, I want to point out that double standard. Nobody says we have to get rid of the Israeli government.
Because the Israeli government is infinitely better than Hamas.
It's not. It's not by any.
Better in what sense?
I'm serious.
Better in what sense?
It's better in that it's a democracy. Better in that it responds to international global pressure. Better in that their goal isn't the entire annihilation of a group of people. If you think that the role
absolutely is their absolute intention is the absolute erasure of Palestinians.
Then how is it the Palestinian population has exploded in the Gaza Strip over the past?
Because they're doing it in slow motion. There's
slow motion going the opposite way. Is it like when you go faster than light and you go backwards through time?
That's a very, very cute talking point. But when you look at what actually Israeli policy has been for literally decades, it's been confining Palestinians to smaller and smaller areas. You can see it unfolding.
What does slow motion mean? How slow are we going here? What?
Of Gaza, they've just given up on Gaza. They basically besieged the entire thing. It's a cage. Palestinians can do whatever they want there. They don't care about Gaza anymore, and that's how they wanted to leave it. In the case of the West Bank, they absolutely are squeezing Palestinians into smaller and smaller areas. So you can talk about the Palestinian population increasing in terms of numbers, but they're in the areas that Israel is interested in taking over. They're absolutely decreasing. When you look at Jerusalem, every few years you look at it, and the number of Palestinians in Jerusalem is actually decreasing. It's a deliberate policy of pushing Palestinians out. But so from my perspective,
when you look at the number of Palestinians is decreasing, are you saying because some of them are getting citizenship for Israel now? Because Israel
no. Because Israel is demolishing their homes and replacing them, and in some cases you see it actually on video of Palestinian families being thrown out of their homes in East Jerusalem.
Oh, this is the one talking point that I don't know what the Arab population in East and West Jerusalem over time. I don't know that. I don't know the number of that. So, Arab population in East Jerusalem. Jesus Christ. 61% of the population is Arab/Palestinian, 39% is Jewish. What was it before? I don't even know if I could find numbers like this. Like, Arab population in East Jerusalem over time. It wouldn't surprise me if the percentage has decreased, maybe. But the numbers have increased because more Jews are moving to East Jerusalem. I don't know if Jews moved to East Jerusalem or not. I don't know how common that is.
Jerusalem, and Jewish settlers come and take over those homes.
There is citizenship available for every person living even in East Jerusalem, because a lot of people don't want it because they don't want to be part of Israel. Right? Do you think, real quick, because you mentioned between the Hamas and the IDF, do you think if Hamas ran Israel and Jews...
Oh, and this is it. Forcing your opponents to take a strong position? I'm glad that I asked this question. Oh, I'm glad. I need to ask more questions like this.
Be part of Israel, right? Do you think, real quick, because you mentioned between the Hamas and the IDF, do you think if Hamas ran Israel and Jews lived in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, do you think the situation would look the same, or do you think Hamas would treat them worse?
I have no idea.
You couldn't possibly.
What would it look like to be treated worse than Gaza?
Oh, what a stupid question! Well, I can't even imagine. Whoa.
Being treated now?
A million times. It could be actual starvation. It could be actual dying.
There is actual starvation in Gaza. So people are dying by the dozens.
I understand we've had that. I wish I brought a list of me. I have like 52 different stories between October and now where verge of famine, imminent mass starvation, almost famine, about to start. It's been happening for 6 months. And prior to this, people say it's been happening for 20 years.
Dozens of children dying.
If you go by Al Jazeera reports, the number is 32. And that's the most favorable. Al Jazeera re-reporting the Gazan health.
So that's acceptable for you. That's a humane policy.
I also think it's a little annoying that I feel like this guy's yapped for most of the time, even with me talking faster, and I feel like he cuts me off on almost everything. One talking point that I have a problem with, which is annoying because I already talk very quickly. Sometimes somebody says something and it'll light up like a web of like 6 things in my head, and I want to get every single one of them out while still like advancing my point, but I end up steamrolling on everything, and I shouldn't. I should focus, because it sounds like I end up just like mumble fucking like a cluster of words out when it's important that I get out every single thing, but I feel like I'm always going to get interrupted. I need to stop thinking that's going to happen, even though he is interrupting me. Yeah, like if somebody's going to say something like, oh, look how many people have died in Palestine, my answer is going to be something like, because in my mind, all of a sudden, like 5 other countries pop up. But then I also want to say all these countries have had these things and you don't know any of those numbers. And what it comes out is like, oh, you think the Palestinian thing is bad? What about all of the deaths in Syria? That's been like 300,000, and then the Yemen stuff has been like 80,000, and you think that that's okay, right? When I should like go from like place to place to place to place to place, and then do the thing. But I always feel like I'm going to get cut off. But I do get cut off. I just need to keep talking. I just say, please let me finish. That's a good one. I need to use that more when I'm speaking to people. Please let me finish, because usually people let you.
Most favorable. Al Jazeera re-reporting the Gazan health.
So that's acceptable for you.
I didn't say it was acceptable. I'm just saying the idea that this place has been starved for decades, and we have 32 possibly doesn't show for it.
You're conflating things. You're once again conflating things.
Not conflating. I asked you a very simple question that you're not going to answer, which is, if Hamas ran Israel, do you think that the treatment would be better, worse?
I don't see the point of speculating about things that we have no idea what it's going to be like.
Because you said that the IDF is worse than Hamas.
Yes, in terms of the scale of the atrocities they committed. There's no question.
Okay, so in
no
that case, you
question
agree
about
that the
it.
United States is worse than Hamas, and that basically every single large country is worse
No,
than
no,
Hamas
no, no.
because
I
of the
think
scale of the country?
I think
or?
the genocidal campaign that Israel is currently engaged in Gaza is kind of unique. It's not commonplace for countries to engage in that level of violence.
When you
Let
say
me-
that, but,
yeah.
does October 7th count as genocidal? Or
Let me just
Doesn't answer that one. I should have focused on that again. I should have punched that again. Fuck! I should have punched that again. I don't think I asked him. Was October 7th genocidal?
I just want to
You're
know.
so
It is
good.
fascinating
You're so good
that we
at
won't
saying so
answer
many
that.
things
No, I'm not
and
saying
having
that.
me chase
You're
the ball
one.
into different
Let me
directions.
just be very clear, then you can answer everyone.
Sure.
Okay? I am not saying so many things. I will ask a very clear question. You won't engage, and then you're going to yap about a whole bunch of unrelated stuff like genocidal campaigns. I'll read it one more time. You're not going to answer. I understand. But my very clear question was: if Hamas was in control of Israel, and then the IDF in Israel was in control of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, do we think that Hamas, who would now own nuclear weapons and a full military and everything, would they be treating the Jews better or worse than the Jews are treating the Palestinians?
Yeah, and my answer is I don't know.
Okay, of course.
So, you mentioned
That's a wild answer. I hope people see that. That's a wild answer. I have no with the Sunni fundamentalist Islamic jihadist party, with these guys who constantly make calls for global jihad against the Israelis. Would they be treating them? I'm not sure about that one. I don't know. What is the Hamas equivalent to Haaretz? Where is the Hamas Bet Salem? Like, come on. We need a bad historian, and they show an obvious inability to contextualize information coherently. Does it kill some of the credibility you attribute to professional academics? No, you just have to be aware that some people are full of shit and some people aren't, right? Keep in mind that, like, I might say things on this stream like, oh, fucking PhDs and academics and blah, blah, blah. But a lot of my research comes from PhDs. Benny Morris is a historian, right? The World War I book we're reading right now is written by a historian. A lot of the documents and stuff we go through are by, like, credentialed, authored people. So, you know, some are bad, some are good, just like every profession. Except for streamers. They're all bad. And rapists. And trans.
that Hamas has to go. I think the Israeli government has to go by that logic. And the question then becomes, what cost would be acceptable to impose on Israeli civilians in order to get the Israeli government out of power? Would you impose starvation and all that? Of course, nobody would endorse that. Everybody understands that that's a completely monstrous idea for a government that has committed far greater atrocities than Hamas has. And then you have the second point of, if you want to get rid of Hamas, it might be useful to ask yourself how Hamas came into being. How did they come about? How did they get support? And it's obvious that brutality towards Palestinians is how Hamas came into being, because they created it literally. And it's you know, even if you want to leave out the part where Netanyahu was effectively indulging their existence as a means of dividing.
Oh, I just had a really good talking point. Fuck. What has been the largest single day of casualties inflicted on the Palestinians since the war started? Was it as big as October 7th? Has there been a single day where more than 1,200 people have died?
Palestinians. Israeli politicians have been quite explicit about the fact that they see this as a useful policy to prevent a Palestinian state from existing. But Hamas gained support as an alternative to the Palestinian Authority that was pliant, that was bending over backwards to try to accommodate Israel. And they said, no, we can get you freedom because we're going to fight. And that's how they gain power. And if your idea is to defeat Hamas and get them out of power by brutalizing Palestinians even more, that's just completely delusional. Even if you get rid of Hamas as an organization, whatever replaces it, whether they call themselves Hamas or not, you're creating another generation of traumatized people who are going to be desperate for revenge, and you're just basically perpetuating conflict forever.
That was the point that I was making earlier. Some of the founders of Hamas, as children, lived through massacres in Gaza in the 1950s. This is well-known history. It doesn't justify what they did, but it raises questions about whether or not tactically, strategically, those massacres worked to Israel's benefit. Now, if you are Netanyahu and you want to divide Palestinians and the extremists are good for you, then it does work to their benefit. But if you're trying to defeat Hamas or the ideology of kind of armed resistance to Israel.
And if you really want a two-state solution.
But if you really want a solution to this crisis, then why would more cowbell, like more violence, why would that finally work?
I don't think more or less violence will work. There has to be.
We could try less. We've tried more.
It's not less. Hasn't. The entire history of the Palestinian people against Israel since '48 has been one of violence, nonstop.
All right. So
do you acknowledge that? I should have asked for that. Do you acknowledge that? Do you acknowledge that? Do you accept that? Do I ask that? Do I force them to acknowledge that?
The idea that if you're just peaceful for a little bit, it'll fix things isn't going to work. The Palestinian people don't want peace; they want justice. And in their mind, right now, justice has to do with acquiring some amount of Israel. Now, whether that is the entirety of Israel into a single state or whether that's a two-state solution, again.
But that's not acquiring parts of Israel. If you're talking about two states, that's acquiring occupied territory that is not Israel's, and Israel has to withdraw from.
It's not anybody's. What do you mean it's not Israel's?
It does not belong to Israel.
Who does it belong to?
International law is extremely clear about the fact that they have to withdraw from that territory.
International law is not extremely clear. What are you
it is
talking
extremely
about?
clear.
You're going to reference a single advisory opinion written by the UN in 2004 when they had a one-paragraph treatment.
He hasn't read that advisory opinion. He has no idea what international law is, and that's why they always vaguely reference things and they never reference exact things, okay? When I first started getting into this stuff, like 6 months ago, My biggest fear for these conversations was that I was going to be getting buried by people who were more well-read than me. That it was going to be like, oh, are you familiar with this or that or that? And I'm like, fuck, I'm not. I'm really not. I thought it was going to be like my Ryan Dawson conversation. And even Ryan Dawson didn't really bury me. He was just a guy that had done 1 week of research against me who'd done 1 day of research. That debate that we had about the Middle East like fucking 7 years ago. Christ. I don't understand what these guys do with all their time. At the very least, I can understand Ryan and Emily because they're just like, they're journalists. But like, if Omar has been studying this issue forever, like I feel like he should be able to demolish me. Like, oh, well, it wasn't just the 2004 advisory opinion. Technically, there was a blah, 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 blah. It's like, what do you mean?
No,
you haven't
not
even
to
read
mention
the
resolutions.
reports.
An
Stephen,
endless
before
mountain of UN resolutions that make absolutely clear that
yes,
Israel has
and
no
there was
right
also
to be
UN
the occupied
resolutions.
territory.
Yeah, and
But
resolutions.
before we get into the
yeah.
resolutions, since you raised the virtue of the
Sure.
Israeli government, I did want to ask if you had seen the Plus 972 article on the
Where did the drop your gun and become oars to combat? Where did that go?
Lavender AI program. I imagine you saw this.
Yeah, I read through it a bit.
So let me read you a little portion of it. So the IDF used artificial intelligence to identify Hamas members. It used to be that you had to be, I think, colonel or above to be, specifically targeted by an airstrike, and there had to be some precautions taken to minimize the civilians that you might be around. The IDF, after October 7th, got rid of both of those precautions. They said any Hamas member is now able to be targeted by an airstrike, and civilian casualties don't matter. In fact, maximizing civilian casualties seems to be a feature of the program. I'll just read from this, if you can put up the 972 magazine article. They write, during the early stages of the war, the Army gave sweeping approval for officers to adopt Lavender's kill lists with no requirement to thoroughly check why the machine made
I also like how every single article they have like saved is against me, and and they've got like clips of Twitter saved against me. It's like, that's fine. I'm here to debate. I flew in. Listen, I caught a flight at 5 a.m. to come to DC just for this conversation. Okay, you can throw whatever you want at me.
choices or to examine the raw intelligence on which they were based. One source stated that human personnel often served only as a, quote, rubber stamp for the machine's decisions, adding that normally they would personally devote only about 20 seconds to each target before authorizing a bombing, just to make sure the lavender-marked target...
The woman is conservative. Isn't she on your side? Is she? I feel like she only brought up one, like, factual thing the whole debate. I feel like it was pointed towards me. Although she doesn't, like, attack me a lot, but she just, like, yeah.
Male. This was despite knowing that the system...
Did you read this magazine before you went? Yeah, I read it. I just don't care. This, like, dumb, like, AI. Like, AI is just, like, a buzzword for fucking everything scary. Like, I'm willing to bet that prior to this, like, there were different algorithms that militaries employed. Like, AI... Yeah. In order to, like, select targets and shit. AI has become, like, the new catch-all for, like, scary internet shit. Like, prior to this, it was algorithms, okay? Algorithms and formulas and algorithms and everything is algorithmic and algorithms and algorithms and algorithms, and now it's, like, AI, and the AI and the AI. It's just, like the new, like, buzzword to be scared of things.
Makes what are regarded as errors in approximately 10% of cases and is known to occasionally mark individuals who have merely a loose connection to militant groups or no connection at all. Moreover, the Israeli army systematically attacked the targeted individuals while they were in their homes, usually at night while their whole families were present.
Did they really disallow you from using your iPad? No, that's not true. I loaded that a little bit. But when I showed up with my bag, they said, like, oh, you can leave your bag outside. I'm sure if I would have asked, like, can I please bring in my iPad, maybe they would have said yes. I didn't actually take my yes, but listen, just let me have my heroic myth, all right?
Rather than during the course of military activity. According to the sources, this was because, from what they regarded as an intelligence...
Omar and Ryan also slapped me up in the hallway, too, when I was coming in. They gave me a good punch in the stomach. They stabbed me. It was like Gladiator. They stabbed me in the stomach, and they were like, good luck in your fight. And then they threw me into the arena.
Standpoint, it was easier to locate the individuals in their private houses. Additional automated systems, including one called Where's Daddy, also revealed here for the first time, were used specifically to track the targeted individuals and carry out bombings when they had entered their families' residences. And 972 argues that the reason that you've seen so many women and children killed is that they were identifying men. Sometimes something like 10 to 20% of men in Gaza are named Mohammed. Like if you go through the Ministry of Health list of casualties, many of them have same last names.
I should have said right here, that's kind of racist, dude.
Because they're from the same family. So they're using AI to identify a particular man and then follow him to his home and then killing him with a bomb in his home. Oftentimes, this is an apartment that doesn't just have his family sleeping there, but also has many other families sleeping there.
Which is where the Where's Daddy name comes for that program. They wait for them to be with their families, and they think it's easier to bomb them in their homes rather than try to fight them in the field, and where they're more difficult to find.
Well,
so how could
because of the field, like?
So how could this be worse? Like try to design a government that behaves in a worse way than
the most obvious counter is the numbers don't support the idea that civilians are being targeted en masse. it doesn't even come close to it. I've seen estimates at anywhere it's like 9-to-1 for civilian to military deaths historically in conflict. And the idea that in the Gaza Strip, one of the most densely populated places,
like right there, like I'm talking, he almost just I'm barely getting into my answer. He just yapped for like 3 minutes.
For civilian to military deaths historically in conflict. And the idea that in the Gaza Strip, one of the most densely populated places on the planet, those numbers right now are, depending on whose estimates go, anywhere from 2.5-to-1 to like 4-to-1 in terms of civilian to militant deaths. So the idea that people are being wiped out with innocent family members, there just don't seem to be any numbers at all to support that. Something that's also very frustrating is...
Wait, support for 9-to-1? I don't actually know. I need to look that figure up more. There was I did Hassan research for this one. It was, this guy mentions that as a point of reference, according to the UN, civilians usually make up around 90% of casualties in war. That's a 1-to-9 ratio, 1 combatant for every 9 civilians. I guess we should try to find the report. What does the UN say this? UN, civilian to military casualty in war. 90% of wartime, when is this? This is from May 25th, 2022. 90% of wartime casualties are civilians. Speakers stress pressing Security Council to fulfill responsibility, protect innocent people in conflict. This is a press release, so I don't know if there's an underlying report that this is sourcing from or if it's just a thing that they put out, but there you go. It's the UN. It's the UN's website. It's a title from them.
Hamas engages in behavior that has been documented by the UN, by Amnesty International, by other NGOs, that is supposed to induce the death of civilians. I don't know why nobody seems to ever care about this. Hamas in the Gaza Strip exclusively fights in civilian clothes. Do you acknowledge that?
I was not familiar with that.
You don't care.
How are you not familiar with that? You've been talking about this war for months. You don't know if Hamas fights in civilian clothes or not? How are you not familiar with that? What?
Hamas in the Gaza Strip exclusively fights in civilian clothes. Do you acknowledge that?
I was not familiar with
You
that.
don't care. Hamas will fight from hospitals. Do you acknowledge that?
They don't fight from hospitals.
They don't fight from hospitals? It took the IDF had to siege Al Shifa for 2 weeks to kill a bunch of civilians?
But what happened with the most recent raid on Al Shifa?
Let me. Okay, so you've actually gone. No. I'm going to address this. I'm going to address this.
You're going to address it because you're not. But so let me just get my thing.
Well, he said he doesn't think that they fight from hospitals. But he just said no. He doesn't think that.
Yeah, but I just want to just for people listening, I guess. One of the frustrating things about asymmetrical warfare is that as law of armed conflict has evolved past the 90s, the collapse of the Soviet Union, states are having to do more and more fighting against non-state actors, which has posed a huge challenge to the ICJ and the ICC in terms of how you analyze this conflict. And the reason why it's such a challenge is because international law only works if it allows countries to effectively operate so that countries will want to follow it. So international law tries to balance, for law of armed conflict, two very, very delicate things. One is the protection of overstate combat peoples, people that shouldn't be killed ever. And then the other is a state's ability to conduct warfare. Because if you deprive either of these, if you don't protect civilians, everybody dies. And if you deprive a state of the ability to defend itself, nobody follows law of armed conflict. The issue with Hamas as an asymmetrical opponent is every single behavior that they engage in is meant to induce maximum civilian casualty. That means that they exclusively fight in civilian uniforms. It means that they operate out of civilian, supposed to be special protected areas like hospitals. The Al Shifa raid recently is a good example of that. They booby trap corpses. They booby trap houses. This happened a lot in Protective Edge in 2014. Amnesty International reports show that. There was footage taken out of Al Shifa Hospital in 2008. Amnesty International did a report on that there was an interrogation center in there. And we saw captured CCTV footage that showed hostages being brought into Al Shifa Hospital.
I feel like when I talk about these things, I feel like I bring up a lot of either historical or precise examples from things that have come up, and then I cite the agency that reports it. I feel like when they respond, they go like, okay, but also the IDF has done a lot of bad things over this war. And it's always like the most general shit, like ever. Like, how can I lay out all of these things and not have a single factual point refuted ever?
That Hamas will store munitions and they will fight even from zones that are supposed to be declared safe, and they store ammunitions in places like mosques or homes. All of these behaviors are designed from the Hamas perspective to induce the maximum amount of civilian casualties, and then when it happens, nobody has anything to say with Hamas and everybody has something to say with Israel. Why hasn't Hamas, by the way, these are also considered failures to uphold your duty under international law. Why hasn't Hamas tried to protect the civilian population? All those tunnels they built, they couldn't build one bomb shelter. Why hasn't Hamas tried to set up a humanitarian area? Why is it exclusively on Israel and the international community, and Hamas can't do any type of collaboration or cooperation to do it? It's because they don't care, because the goal is to induce the maximum amount of civilian casualties.
Just one tiny point: if they did build a bomb shelter for civilians, Israel would bomb it and say that look, they're.
Look at what he just said. If they did build a bomb shelter, if they built if they built one bomb shelter, the fact that you even start that sentence off with "if" should be a huge indicator that something is very fucking wrong here.
They're putting civilians in the tunnels.
And if it would happen, that would be the end of the conflict. Because if there is a civilian bomb shelter built and there were no Hamas militants and Israel hit that, then it's over.
Israel
because
has targeted.
at that point, who supports Israel?
They're bombing entire neighborhoods.
wanna
Go
get
ahead.
Oh, they're bombing entire neighborhoods. Oh, and then he just. Did you just ignore? They're bombing entire neighborhoods. Which ones? The houses that they store munitions from, the hospitals that they fire out of, the ones where they tell civilians to stay put so that they get killed by Israel, the ones where they operate in civilian uniforms, the ones where they booby trap the houses. Those neighborhoods. How can he just snowboard over the entire mountain of shit that I just said? And he's like, well, they would bomb them anyway.
Let's get Omar's response to the hospital.
You've gone through a lengthy record. Allow me to do the same, actually, for just 1 second. One of the things that you had actually said recently, I think it's on the Comedy Cellar podcast, is that it is quite blatant.
I don't get a response to any of that. Do people notice? I'm so curious of like their default fans, or maybe people in the center. They notice it. Like he just doesn't have a single thing to say to anything that I just said. Not a single thing.
That you had actually said recently, I think it's on the Comedy Cellar podcast, is that it is quite blatant to you. You said patently obvious that Israel is doing everything it can to protect civilians in Gaza.
Or I think I said more than any other country ever has in the history of armed conflict.
Yep.
Yes.
I think we have.
Go ahead, Omar.
That's not. Oh, actually, it turns out we do have.
Why do they have this clip? What the fuck?
It seems, if you engage with it honestly, and I hate to say this because it sounds very partisan, when you engage with it honestly, it seems obvious, like patently obvious, that Israel is doing everything they can to minimize civilian casualties. That it's like undeniable because the numbers would be so much different if they were just indiscriminately bombing or carpet bombing, as everybody says. So, but I mean, they still have to manage the PR aspect because at the end of the day, perception is really the only thing that matters in international communities with other countries. So,
frankly, the claim that Israel is doing everything it can to minimize civilian casualties is by far the single most absurd thing that I have heard Stephen say, period. Let me run through the record for you.
But then it's like, okay, well then justify that. How can you just like say arguments with no justifications? It's like you learned all about conclusions, but you skipped the class on premises. Like, yeah, if you assert something as a priori truth, if you assert something, as like, oh, well, okay.
Get a soldier at his house at night, if that was your goal.
And with the thing that you mentioned with Lavender, it's specifically when they're at home. But beyond that, just if I can run through that record.
1 second, like, quick. Do you stand by saying everything?
More basically, yeah.
Okay.
The more
Back to Omar.
more than any other country ever has in the history of all of armed conflict.
Perfect.
Sure.
So let's run through the record. Human rights organizations, who are the objective observers on these situations, every single one of them in every subsequent invasion of Gaza, including the current one, talk about Israel engaging in massive indiscriminate bombing of civilian areas. They talk about flattening entire neighborhoods. They talk also about deliberately killing civilians who pose absolutely no threat to Israeli soldiers. They go through and describe these incidents. They raise them with the Israeli military. The Israeli military says we investigated and we saw that nothing wrong happened. And human rights organizations' assessment of the way that Israel conducts itself is that it's completely in violation of international law and that their self-accountability is a complete sham. It's not actually serious. And then you look at what Israeli leaders themselves also say. And by the way, that 972 magazine, there was a article. There was one that came before it as well, in which they described that Israelis' policy in Gaza is to basically shock the civilian population by doing massive devastation in civilian areas as a means of putting pressure on Hamas. And that included an example that they listed, toppling a high-rise residential building without warning on top of the people who are inside it. So that's
a name for it.
And that's based on power targets.
Power target, yeah.
And that's based on interviews with Israeli intelligence officers about Israeli policy in Gaza. And it's long been stated Israeli policy, frankly. If you look at people like Giro Island, Israeli general, who later became the national security advisor in Israel, they talk about the policy being to punish the civilians and to induce so much suffering among them in huge numbers to put pressure on groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. And this is not new here, by the way. During the 2006 invasion of Lebanon, there is an incident in which Israel dropped 1 million cluster bombs all over towns and villages in Lebanon, prompting a high-ranking Israeli commander to say, quote, you can find it on Haaretz, what we did was insane and monstrous. We covered entire towns and villages with cluster bombs. That's how they describe what Israel actually carried out at the time. And then you look at current Israeli statements right now from all of this. Benjamin Netanyahu has been quoted saying in Israeli press, again, talking about what the strategy is with Ron Dermer, and he said the strategy is to thin the population in Gaza down to a minimum. That's what he actually wants to do. He uses genocidal language like the Amalek, which is a quote from the Bible about murdering the children and babies of your enemies.
Amalek appears out to the Hague. The idea that it's exclusively used to describe animals is not true. But
and you have then Israeli soldiers themselves, so in case there's a misinterpretation of that, celebrating that they're going to kill Palestinians.
There's literally this idea that like the Amalek just refers to like subhuman, like horrible people. Like it's literally outside of the Hague, the International Criminal Court. Like the idea that this is like some horrible racist thing is just like fucking stupid. It's like, okay.
Palestinian civilians, they're chanting about the Amalek and how we're going to destroy them. And you have people.
It's just like yap after yap after yap. Okay, let's get some facts. Like okay. Oh no, I think I counter this at the end of this.
Are actually posting videos of themselves talking about we're killing them by the tens of thousands. Isn't that great? So that's the rhetoric of Israeli soldiers themselves on the ground. Then they're caught on tape shooting children in the head when they posed absolutely no threat. It happened in Jenin, even in the West Bank during this current crisis.
Do you think you should interrupt them more? It feels like you're always very generous letting them speak. I feel like if you start getting interruptions, it turns into a shit show. I don't think I can do this. What stuff are you writing down? I usually just write down like 1 or 2 keywords so that that's why I'm looking at the paper so much, because when I'm responding, I'm trying to hit every single talking point that they said, is because I'm writing down like things relating to what he's yapping about right now.
Where you saw 2 young children being shot.
What is this quote about thinning the population? It's some bullshit fabricated quote that there's no source for, that doesn't make any sense, and it's just another fucking meme.
The head, with basically very obviously posing no threat. You saw in Gaza a grandmother holding the hand of a young child while carrying a white flag, and they shoot her dead while the child is holding her hand, and the child freaks out and everybody else runs away. You have a pattern that is documented on video of these kinds of crimes. You have American doctors who visit Gaza and talk about the horrors they see in hospital, how there's countless children who come in with single sniper bullet wounds to the head. They can't keep track of how many of these are coming in. And you have the president of the United States Joe Biden describing Israeli bombings of Gaza as indiscriminate. The idea that you can look at this mountain of evidence between what human rights organizations are reporting, what Israeli leaders are saying, what Israeli soldiers are posting of themselves, and what the American government's assessment of that bombing is, and to say they're doing everything they can to minimize civilian casualties, is just so thoroughly dishonest on behalf of an apartheid government that is committing atrocities before all of us. It's mind-boggling. Steve, you honestly would have to be either naive to believe that, or dishonest, and you just don't strike me as a naive guy. You're a very smart guy. I don't understand how you can actually say that.
It's just funny because the entire yap you just did is completely destroyed by a single question. How do you explain the numbers? How do you explain the ratio of even what Hamas has claimed?
I think it's
70% to women and children. How do you explain that percentage?
Because women and children. Hold on, I'm sorry. Because for children, we're saying 18 and under, as opposed to the traditionally fighting age is what we would usually talk about in these conflicts. But everything when it comes to Palestinians, there's special rules.
You can bend this however you want.
It's not bending. I'm asking.
Like, I don't even get, well, bro, he just went on like a 5-minute yap. I don't even get to start to respond. What the fuck? He just went on a 5-minute yap.
Dresden,
how do you explain the fact that even Hamas admitted, I believe that I think it was 7,500 or 8,000 of the people killed were
I don't remember what their exact numbers are.
So I have an analysis from March 12th. So this is from Just Security. As of this date, the IDF reported 29,000 airstrikes in Gaza. At that date, the number of reported civilian deaths in Gaza was roughly 29,200. The number of Hamas fighters killed in action has been claimed by the IDF and Hamas, both without evidence. The IDF claims 12,000 fighters killed, while Hamas claims 6,000 fighters killed. So we can look at those numbers given the demographic data from the health ministry. Out of 29,200 deaths, about 9,700 were men, and the rest were women and children. If the IDF claim is true, this is equivalent to every man being killed in Gaza being a Hamas fighter and several thousand women and or children being Hamas fighters. This is extremely unlikely, but to be extremely conservative, I will use the IDF reported Hamas casualty numbers, 12,000, to give a lower bound on civilian deaths in Gaza. In addition, we need to subtract deaths that would normally happen for this population, so about 4,900 deaths per year on average, equivalent to about 1,800 in a 4.5-month period.
I have no idea what the source for this analysis is. I will say, though, you always have to be careful. Children is a very, Western concept. In the West, for us, if you're 18 or under, you're, totally fucking safe. You're the most harmless butterfly. Like a 17-year-old is just skipping and doing hopscotch and jump rope, and that's it. But in the rest of the world, especially in the rest of the fighting world, right? Boys are given arms sometimes is crazy. It is as early as 7 or 8 years old, right? This is seen in Yemen. But definitely once you're your teenage years, 13, 14, 15, of course, these people are being armed and they fight. So the idea that you've got, teenage boys that are 15, 16, 17 years old that are armed and out there fighting and then they get killed. And I was like, oh no, children deaths. It's tragic that people are being armed and are fighting at a young age, that's for sure. It was tragic to draft 18 to 22-year-olds for World War II. Those are children, really. But this stupid, they always do this hand-wavy thing because remember, they're going for the normative baggage. When they say a child was killed, they're not trying to refer to an age. They're invoking the concept of childlike innocence. A 17-year-old being killed. When you think of a 17-year-old, you think of a kid with acne who goes to school with a book bag slung over one shoulder who's scared to talk to girls. That's a child that's being killed. You don't think of somebody who might have been doing weapons training for 3 or 4 years that's engaged in active military conflict, right? So it's trying to pull in this normative baggage of what a child is in order to make it feel like every single person under the age of 18 was like a kid in math class being sniped by an IDF, monster.
This gives us a minimum number of civilian war deaths of approximately 15,700. Based on 29,000 airstrikes, that leads to an average of 54 civilians killed per 100 attacks. And just lastly, this analysis goes on to say, despite the alarm over the high rate of civilian deaths in Raqqa, one finds the minimum equivalent in Gaza, 54 civilians killed in 100 attacks, is 8 times greater than the Air Wars-based estimate and 32 times greater than the DoD estimate. And recall that 52 number is a lower bound for the Gaza ratio. It is likely far higher than this. So, Stephen, do you dispute the validity of those numbers?
What was the ratio of fighters on the lower bound? What was the ratio of fighters to civilians there? Did it say Hamas claimed 6,000?
6,000.
Yeah.
So and the death toll at that time was how much?
29,000.
About 9,000 men total.
So 6,000, and it was 29,000 total deaths?
29,200 total deaths, 9,700 were men.
So if you're taking that's the Hamas reported number, you're at 1 militant to 4 civilians. And that's for the Hamas reported number. How can the ratio be so horrible if Israel is on a genocidal, indiscriminate campaign against Hamas?
Yes,
how can that possibly be the case?
They're doing it again in slow motion to give plausible deniability that this is happening after war. It's obvious. Look, they've destroyed.
It's everything. This is the best genocide ever. It's a genocide that's so fucking effective and so fucking insidious. It's not even killing the population. It's such an amazing genocide. We began the genocide in 1990 when there were only 1 million of them, and we're still genociding them today when there are 2 million of them. And in 2050, once the Palestinians have taken over the entire world, no one will suspect the genocide because they're everywhere. Like, what are we talking about? This is like Schrodinger's genocide.
80% of the buildings,
no, they've displaced
90% of the population. Can you name any other conflict in which you've displaced 90% of the civilian population?
No, because usually they just destroy them. You think in Dresden they told the civilians to flee? Do you think in the Tokyo firebombing
they let them? I should have said they let them flee. Technically, they did drop leaflets, but like, yeah, the 100,000 plus people killed in the Tokyo firebombings were not all militants. They were fucking civilians.
Nagasaki and Hiroshima, did we tell the civilians to leave? Can you acknowledge? Hold on. Can you acknowledge that what you just said was incredibly fucking stupid? That no, they don't tell civilians to leave first. Normally they just kill them.
Yeah.
Because we knew.
No, I need to hear an acknowledgement.
Because he thinks that's such a clever line. Let me explain something to you.
He's not going to acknowledge
No, I'm going to acknowledge it. I'm going to acknowledge it. Yes, they told civilians to leave, and then they dropped massive 2,000 bombs on the safe zones that they told the civilians to flee to.
There was one safe zone, the beach or whatever.
There have been countless incidents of them dropping. Now you're just lying.
I'm not. I looked it up. You're looking at all the data on all the safe zones. There's 4 hours of roads that they make safe per day where they guarantee travel.
There's a New York Times investigation.
There's
a New York Times investigation and there's an NBC investigation. Both of them document the fact that Israel is bombing safe zones where they tell civilians to flee.
And Israel admitted this. Israel admitted this.
Hold on.
Israel admitted at CNN that intelligence indication that these places were safe houses for commanders of the Rafah Brigade of the Hamas terror
Notice how he didn't answer the question? Yeah, no shit.
Organization. This was back in December about bombing areas that were supposed to be evacuation routes.
Evacuation routes are not safe zones. There's been one official declared safe zone.
Shouldn't it be safe?
Shouldn't Hamas not operate from there? I mean, we're talking again.
That's a good question.
I should have made him answer that. Should they not? Hello? Yeah, maybe that'd be a good idea, Chief.
There's one zone. I wish I could remember. Is it Al? It's Al Moa something. It's the beach.
They call me the snapper. Okay, because if you try to ask me a dumb question like that, I'm gonna snap back on you. Okay?
West of Khan Yunis or whatever. Nobody knows the name of it. This is the
Al Mawasi. She looked it up for me. Thank God. I should have remembered the name of the speech. It's Al Mawasi. I think I was calling it Al Mawawi. I think it's west of Khan Yunis, right? Oh, it is. Al Mawasi. Isn't that the capital of Yemen?
They told people to go to Khan Yunis, it would be safe there. They bombed Khan Yunis.
They absolutely did not declare that Khan Yunis would be a safe zone. No, that's absolutely.
Why did they tell people to go there?
Well, initially because most of the combat operations were in the north.
Concentrate them and kill them there. Why else would they say go there?
If you're a Palestinian,
let me answer the question. Let me answer.
So they operations were in the north.
Concentrate them and kill them there. Why else would they say go there?
If you're a Palestinian,
are we going to see 20, 30, 40, 50,000 deaths soon? Then are we about to see like 100,000 Palestinians go up in smoke? That's what they're doing. They're hurting them all to one city so they can blow them all up. Wait, but I thought we said they were going for plausible deniability. Now they're hurting them to one giant kill zone and blowing them all up.
Yes, and now they're going to tell them that it's time to.
It's almost like this is absolutely an incoherent plot that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. What?
Relocate because we're going to invade Rafah and send them to places where there is no food, water, or shelter, and have them.
And they're going to be on imminent starvation and death like they have been for the past 5 months.
It's going to be ongoing killing rate, killing them by the tens of thousands, and saying, "Oops, it's just war. Gaza is unlivable anymore. Too bad it can't support Palestinian life. People are starving. It's just all an accident." That they're doing it. They're doing.
It's crazy that the numbers are so poor for a country that could kill so many more people. But they're doing things that no other country's done. Do you acknowledge that no other country does leaflets, phone calls to buildings, roof knocking sirens?
You
get that no other country's done that.
Human rights organizations, including.
You're not going to answer.
He's not going to answer the question. He's not. It does it again. They won't answer the fucking question.
Calls to buildings, roof knocking sirens.
You
get that no other country's done that.
Human rights organizations, including.
You're not going to answer that.
The U.S. cleared Mosul out. Other countries do it. Yeah.
I mean, you literally interrupt me.
Before we went into,
you literally interrupt me to tell me I'm not going to answer
because
something.
You're not answering. You're rambling.
Okay, so Omar, go ahead.
You were saying no country has done anything like roof knockings and leaflets and all that. And when you look at what human rights organizations say about these, they say they're completely pointless because there's nowhere for these civilians to go that is safe. So you can drop a leaflet. It's a game, right? And like the fact that people like you fall for it, it's just kind of really embarrassing.
You still have no explanation for the ratio, for the 1 to 4 on the lower zone.
They tell civilians to flee because here we're going to be so nice and make sure that you don't die. And then when they flee, they kill them as
he has no explanation for it.
They're fleeing, or they kill them wherever they arrive.
The numbers are so disproportionate.
If you were a Palestinian, what would you do if you lived in?
Probably go south to the whatever the beach was. I wish I had the name of it right now. But there's been one singularly declared safe area, and it's that beach.
How many Palestinians do you want to crowd into that, whatever that small beach is?
I guess it's 1 point, however many million.
How many bathrooms are there? How much water is there?
And
it's better than getting blown up by a bomb. If you want the war to stop, how about just have Hamas leave and release the hostages?
Or Israel could just stop bombing Gaza.
Why would Israel stop attacking an enemy that committed the largest terror attack per capita in the history of the entire country?
It's a ridiculous double standard.
Wait, hold on. You think it's reasonable to tell Israel, hey, Hamas, I know that you guys did a little bit of a large terrorism against us and have been, by the way, which is a violation of international law, indiscriminately launching rockets for decades from this law. And every single one of those is a violation of international law because those are by definition indiscriminate, which by definition fail the distinction principle that is essential to law of armed conflict. One of the three prongs. So wait. So
I can't finish a single fucking sentence. He keeps trying to cut me off.
Israel needs to allow Hamas to stay there, who's been breaking international law of armed conflict for 20 years.
As opposed to Hamas allowing the Israeli government to stay there when they're breaking international law for even longer than that.
And I want to put a fine point on that.
Seriously,
No response. There's never the whataboutisms, the yapping.
Honestly, I want to get an answer to that. Why is it that you think that the Israeli government, having committed all the atrocities that they committed...
Because the Israeli government is a democracy that can be reasoned with. Their neighbors have reasoned with them. People have signed peace agreements. People have reached agreements with them. The Palestinians have not. And there's a reason, by the way, which you will never recognize, why all of the surrounding Arab states have abandoned Palestinians too. Because their history has been one of violence, that first they've been encouraged by the surrounding nations and used by them. And then now they've been abandoned once the other nations have used them.
That's a racist anti-Palestinian
Racist? What happened in the 70s? Why did the Palestinians get kicked out of Jordan in the 70s? Why did the Palestinians assassinate the Jordanian king in 52 in Jerusalem? Why did the Palestinians get kicked out of Lebanon? Why does Egypt want to work with the Palestinians?
Do you believe he's a racist?
Why? No, they don't. He does nothing. He does nothing. I just want to slow down and I want you to answer every single fucking one of these questions. Like, what is the format? Maybe the only way to do it is with a host. I want you to tell me what happened in Jordan in 1970. I want you to tell me why the Jordanian king was assassinated in Jerusalem and by who and why. I want you to tell me what happened in southern Lebanon. I want you to tell me why Arafat was exiled from even Palestine. I want you to tell me, I want to hear every single one of these explained, and then you can tell me if I'm being racist. I just want an answer to these, but I can't. I just have to I got to yap through it, and then I get cut off, and then we don't even...
Racist, Omar.
Yes.
When he talks about Palestinians, nobody likes them and nobody wants them and nobody whatever. Yes, absolutely, that's a racist description.
Why do they?
I don't like. Can I let me be clear?
Yeah.
This distinction between there's a category of people who are racist, and a category of people who are not. I think that's a simplistic thing.
Why did Egypt abandon them in their peace talks from 73 to 79? Why didn't what's the answer? I'm curious. What does he think the answer is? Are all the Arabs racist against Palestinians as well?
He just described is a racist stereotype. There's absolutely no question about it.
I don't want
to get into who he
is.
is.
To a lot of people that are pro-Palestinian. I understand. History is traumatizing.
If you don't understand that the Egyptian dictatorship is collaborating with Israel to suppress anything that is Muslim Brotherhood affiliated, and that's why the reason they're collaborating against Gaza.
Was Nasser collaborating with the Israeli government when they locked all the Gazans in the Gaza Strip and didn't let any of them leave?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Steve, you do.
Does he have no? Why won't you engage with this? And then he pivots to a personal attack. Why would he not engage with this at all?
The government when they locked all the Gazans in the Gaza Strip and didn't let any of them leave?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Steve, you do this thing constantly where you bring up random anecdotes that are completely irrelevant to anything that what I'm.
It's not random at all.
Sorry, I'm sorry. The reason why that wasn't random is because you applied today that the dictatorship in Egypt, first of all, you said dictatorship, very loaded. Yes, Egypt's had a history of dictatorships. You're implying that they're collaborating with Israel in a unique way.
Why can't I finish my sentence? Why do you keep cutting me off?
Yes, Egypt's had a history of dictatorships. You're implying that they're collaborating with Israel in a unique way. You're acting like they're collaborating with Israel in a unique way. And even from 48 to 67, when Egypt had control of the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians were still locked in the Gaza Strip.
Let's be clear about something. All right. Let me be clear about something. Right now, this rhetoric, I'm going to let it go for now. The idea is looking at all the surrounding Arab governments who are collaborating with Israel. It's a sign that they hate Palestinians. When you do opinion polling in any of these countries, all of them, including in Saudi Arabia, the overwhelming majority of the population wants to cut off any talk. They want to isolate Israel diplomatically. They don't want to deal with them. The people of the region absolutely oppose what Israel is doing to Palestinians. And the fact that you can cite a handful of governments in the surrounding area who all effectively belong to the U.S. orbit and operate under and get tremendous privilege and financial privilege and security privilege for collaborating with the United States, and to try to paint that as some sort of validation that they have anti-Palestinian sentiment, I think is completely ridiculous and ignorant of the dynamics that actually exist in the region.
Was this an example when Krystal said that he did a good job pointing out the tactics Destiny was trying to... Yeah, tactics. Yeah, history and fact are like fucking... it's like kryptonite to a lefty. Anytime you start talking I learned that, I think 3 or 4 years ago, even before I was on Vyvanse, that any single time a lefty says you need to read history, what they really mean is, I know that you haven't read the history, because if you had, you would be hardcore calling me out on this particular point. Because these motherfuckers hate history. They hate it. History is kryptonite to these motherfuckers. These guys live in tweets.
A region that I grew up in, by the way. What you have, I grew up in Kuwait, Jordan, Yemen, Oman, and the United Arab.
The fact that you grew up in Kuwait? In what year? Kuwait? Hold up.
Emirates, and I visited Palestine on multiple occasions.
Gotcha. Wait, you grew up in Kuwait in what years? Was that when Arafat was supporting Saddam Hussein? I
was born in Kuwait in 1982, and I lived there until that war. Okay. And yes, when Arafat made statements in support of Saddam Hussein, that became the reason why many...
Yep, that's why your family got kicked out, and they were never allowed back, because the Palestinian leader supported Saddam Hussein. Oh, yikes. Yikes, fam.
Palestinians could not go back to Kuwait.
Yeah, which was a really big deal too, which is also funny because those Oslo Accords, we point to Israel not being a good partner for peace. The only reason why those Oslo Accords were so horrible is because Arafat was desperately looking for a way back into Palestinian popularity after supporting Saddam Hussein when he expelled.
Yep, when your family got kicked out, that was why those Oslo Accord negotiations were bad.
Oslo, yes, and you know what was also happening, and the reason why Oslo happened is because while Arafat was looking for a way to get validation as the leader of Palestinians and come back, Israel was dealing with the fact that there's a Palestinian uprising, the first Intifada, overwhelmingly non-violent, in which Palestinians were doing civil disobedience, sometimes throwing rocks at soldiers, and Israel was brutalizing them for year after year. After they killed so many of them that the Israeli officials started being concerned about the optics of it, so they said, don't kill them, beat them up and break their arms instead. And what you ended up with,
I'm so curious.
and what you ended up with,
I'm so much more.
and what you ended up with. Allow me to finish.
second.
You have to let me finish my thought every now and then.
Yeah.
I like how when I try to like get in here, he actually shuts me down. Are you serious? I get interrupted so many times in this debate. He's like, hold on, you gotta let him finish. Like, oh, he's like captivated by this guy talking. Seriously?
I'm so curious.
And what you ended up with,
I'm so much more.
and what you ended up with. Allow me to finish.
second.
You have to let me finish my thought every now and then.
Yeah.
And what you ended up with
every now and then.
I understand. We get
They
it.
started beating up Palestinian protesters and seeing them, brutalizing them, and breaking.
And they never even have like real points to bring up. We're not even having a debate, right? It's like, hey, how about this? Fact. And they're like, so what about the time when Israel shoots off the legs of small children and then the hospital doctors look at them from the West and they say, oh my God, there are children with sniper bullets. And you're like, okay, well, what about this? Like, fact. And then in Lebanon, they wrote in the diary, we need to stop bombing because there's so much death. Okay, well, what about like, fact. Israeli soldiers bomb houses with the where's your daddy protocol to murder whole families at night. Like, okay.
their bones on video, and that ended up being an even bigger disaster for Israel. And they did not know what to do with that civil uprising of people who wanted to be free from occupation. And so they struck a deal with Arafat and brought him in to suppress the Intifada on the fake and false promise that they might grant Palestinians a state. Arafat fell for it, and it was all a sham made
Arafat fell for it.
to suck the energy out of a genuine Palestinian uprising for freedom and to turn it into the fraudulent Oslo process in which Israel had cover to expand more and more settlements and entrench the occupation under the pretense of peace. That's the history of what happened.
So what could Israel have done after October 7th that would have been, and I don't want to lump you into this camp, some people said it's about proportionality. What could Israel have done after October 7th that would have either been proportional or given some of the legitimate points that Stephen made about a densely populated area where you have a military and a civilian population crowded into hospitals, et cetera? What could Israel have done? What should they have done after October 7th that would have been a just response?
And I promise I'll address that directly, but just on the context that you just described before that, you have a situation in which there is, it's impossible to have a situation in which Hamas is fighting not in civilian areas. I mean, when you talk about the difference in power, one side has a full-fledged military, has air force, has tanks. Hamas can't just go out in the field and confront them directly. So they do. Thank you. You'd have to let me finish my sentence every now and then, Stephen. Seriously.
Yeah, you have to, bro. You just cut. Oh my God.
Try, in the words of Norman Finkelstein, try to have the self-possession to just listen a little bit more.
And in the style of Norman Finkelstein, be wrong about everything.
Yeah,
Keep
great.
going.
You have a situation in which the balance
Thank you, Emily. I needed that recharge.
of power makes it so that
Finkelstein, be wrong about everything.
Yeah,
Keep
great.
going.
You have a situation in which the balance of power makes it so that those militants have to effectively use guerrilla tactics, and guerrilla tactics involve hiding in civilian areas. That's how that actually that happens. And if you're really upset about that and you think that that's a real problem, by all means, arm Hamas the way you arm Israel, and then they can have military on military war, and we can spare the Palestinian civilians if you think that's really what's the underlying motivation. But of course, nobody would ever consider that. We only arm the criminals on one side with massive armaments. Now, on the question of what Israel should have done, there's two separate questions that often get conflated. There's the question of, is it a just war to begin with? And then there's the question of proportion. And you can imagine if people in Gaza were free and Israel was not controlling their lives and deciding how much food they get to eat and whether they can go and come back, and then some kind of attack happened, you might expect some kind of Israeli retaliation. And then the only conversation would be about proportionality. Are they doing it in a way that is defensible? And what they're currently doing is obviously not defensible, to be devastating the civilian population in order to thin that population, by the words of Israel's leader right now.
There's no source of that quote, by the way, which is it comes from the Red Line.
It comes from Israeli press reporting on internal strategic conversations.
Which has never been
happened.
substantiated.
So Israeli media makes things up.
When the population has always had a calorie surplus.
Yeah, even the diet part.
Calorie surplus.
They literally have. That's why when the famine started, when all the people were moved,
Yeah.
I believe it was UNRWA that made the statement that this is a region that has never experienced hunger before. It's
that's what's so
He laughs at my statements, but they're factually 100% correct. Why is he allowed to laugh at me like that? And if they're wrong, he's wrong. You can't laugh at me, sir. You are incorrect.
American finish.
And that's also why Finkelstein got mad, because if you try to say, really, wait, these people are starving? By what metric? You can't find
That's
it
what's so
by any.
infuriating, Stephen, is that you want to start counting calories.
And then he does this. He always does this every time I bring up a fact. That's what's so infuriating. How much of a meanie you are. It's so infuriating how much of a mean guy you are. You're so mean.
try to discover whether they have a surplus.
Why does Ryan hate you? Is it because you called him out on a shitty report on October 7th? I don't actually think Ryan hates me. Ryan is actually incredibly polite. And actually, you know what? So is Omar. Both of these guys were very polite. As much as I got triggered as fuck debating with them, they are both super polite people. Ryan is incredibly polite in real life. Omar was really polite in real life. We shook hands afterwards. After this debate, Omar tried to give me I think we ended up staying for like 2 more minutes debating because he was like, listen, Steven, I think you're a really smart guy, but I think you've been fighting with so many pro-Palestinians on Twitter, it's poisoning your mind. And then I said, actually, I think it's just because I did a lot of reading and I think you guys lie about literally everything. And we started arguing for like a minute or 2 more, and then eventually we left. But both of these guys are incredibly polite. So I will say that in real life. Neither of them come off as like evil, mean people or whatever. So.
Or not, when you're missing the fact that Israel getting to decide what food gets into Gaza is itself outrageous.
Right.
One people does not get to control whether another side gets to have cookies for their children,
and you know
or potato chips or sodas. You don't get to do that. That's a level of dominance and oppression that is unacceptable.
But you're not capable of having it because you won't even admit why the blockade exists. So you don't even deserve to be in.
What do you want him to admit? What do you want him to admit?
Why is there a blockade in Gaza?
Yeah, you tell me.
Why is there a blockade in Gaza?
When you look at the fact that Israel is preventing cookies from going into Gaza,
What is that? That's not an answer.
That it's not motivated
Why
by
would cookies
military.
be prevented from going in?
And
What were
potato
custom
chips.
rockets fueled with?
Yeah, with cookies? Yeah,
With sugar. And
Neither of them knew. They both looked at me like, they were like incredulous that could have possibly been an answer. They don't even have.
that it's not motivated
why
by
would cookies
military.
be prevented from going in?
And
what were
potato
custom
chips.
rockets fueled with?
Yeah, with cookies? Yeah,
With sugar and fertilizer. Yes, that's how they made the early rockets. The first generation that was
we're going to
literally
deny
used.
Palestinians in Gaza sugar because it might be used for
First of all,
I truly don't think they know. Now they use more sophisticated rockets now, but the first iteration of rockets that were coming in the early 2000s from the Gaza Strip, yes, they were literally crude rockets where you would take a bunch of fertilizer, sugar, mix it, and then light it, and it would go. That's literally propellant, solid fuel, sugar, and potassium nitrate mix. The potassium nitrate mix, I think, came from fertilizer. Yes. What? Like, do you think? What is the alternative? Do you think they just banned cookies because they really don't want Palestinians eating Chips Ahoy? Like, what do you? Why do you think it's happening? This is what I mean when I say you can't even engage with the argument honestly. Engage with why they're banned.
Actually, let him back in because he's more sophisticated, right? But again, he's not going to admit it. I just want to be clear another time. Another thing you're not going to admit. Why does the blockade exist? It's literally just because of the evil
Hamas fighters
Jews
breathe
trying
air
to kill
too.
the Amalekite.
Hamas fighters breathe air too. Maybe Israel can restrict air from going into Gaza to make sure that.
But he's saying then the burden should be on Hamas, not to use.
No, Palestinians have no agency.
No.
Rape is the language of the oppressed.
You don't.
They can't help
You don't
themselves.
punish civilian populations.
Yes, rape is the language of the oppressed.
Get military ones. You don't punish civilian populations.
Like indiscriminately shooting tens of thousands of rockets decade after decade into Israel, like what Hamas does.
The scale of
Punishing the
Israeli
civilian
violence.
population, like selling some of the humanitarian food back to the population.
Just want to make sure.
Taking up tunnels of water pipes and using them to fashion rockets.
Just want to make sure.
Taking all the international aid that comes into building tunnels and tunnels of cement.
Stephen, did you say that
Like
Hamas?
Jesus, there's no factual engagement whatsoever. Syria's rocket man put sugar into bombs. I don't think I've ever seen this video before.
With the precision of a master chef, Sheikh Omar adjusts the flame. In the pan, table sugar and a chemical compound bought locally that we've agreed not to name. It's almost ready, he says, as the color darkens.
Holy shit, it's Hamburger Helper.
Sheikh Omar, who doesn't want his face shown, has decades of experience in the art of war. He says he fought with the Palestinians and was detained twice by the Israelis in the 1980s. But they had more mercy than the Assad regime, he adds bitterly. Now he's using his training in weapons design that he got in Libya.
This amount combined with another substance is what he uses to make a single grenade. When it comes to making the propellants for a rocket, it's around 20 times this amount and 2 more substances are included.
Sheikh Omar now works alone after his assistant was killed while they were experimenting. He's designed crude but effective grenades, and his biggest accomplishment, a sleek-looking rocket which he claims has a range of 12 kilometers.
Much of what Sheikh Omar uses comes from unexploded ordnance like this fired by government forces, and clearly marked on this rocket, made in Russia.
When he first started, Sheikh Omar tells us he would modify unexploded rockets. From here to here, for example, is our adjustment. As our the fins, he says, we'd shoot one and it would just go 3 kilometers, or it would turn back around in our direction. Now he designs from scratch, mixing a substance he won't reveal, but that is imported from outside with the explosive he extracts from the government's artillery. He may be the master bomb maker, but Sheikh Omar says he's a man of peace. He wants to see a democratic Syria that reflects this nation's rich diversity, and he believes that after the Assad regime falls, there will be another
He's got actual sugar though. Is there actually a way to get sugar out of cookies to use in rockets? My guess is there's probably some chemical process, yes, to break out simple sugars from highly processed foods. That'd be my guess. I'm not Walter White. I don't know the actual process. We can try to look it up if you want. My guess is going to be, it happens in our bodies. My guess is going to be there's probably some way to dissolve or extract sugar from things that have sugar in them. That'd be just a guess. Just a guess. I'm going to be wrong.
Hamas is turning cookies into missiles.
My understanding is the reason for the restricting of sugar-based products was that the first generation, I think they were called Qassam rockets, were built in really crude shops using combinations of fertilizer and sugars that they would use.
You know what the primary component of Hamas explosives is now?
I'm pretty sure now they use more sophisticated stuff, but I don't know. You tell me.
Unexploded Israeli bombs.
How do you think they? I should. Oh, I didn't even think of it. It's such a stupid point. How do they get the bombs over the walls? They need to launch them. Do you think they throw them? Is the Gaza Strip full of NFL quarterbacks that are hurling these over the wall, Ryan? How do they get them over the wall? How do you get the unexploded ordnance over the wall?
Because
He's focusing on the warhead, not the delivery vehicle. I didn't even catch this in the debate, how stupid this point was.
so many over the last decade.
I doubt that's true. I'm sure they do.
With a 10 to 20% failure rate, Hamas then digs them up. The Yasin 105s that you see, blowing up all these Israeli tanks, primarily fueled by Israeli explosives.
But I doubt the majority of them are.
There's
I'm sure there's no amount.
It's
but also,
not
again, just to reiterate,
more so than cookies.
You're not going to tell me. Well, that's why cookies are no longer.
Yeah,
why does the blockade exist?
I'm going to tell you why the blockade exists.
Okay.
And the reason, by the way, why it includes banning cookies and soda pop and potato chips.
Yes, the Oreos aren't going into the Gaza Strip.
No, I'm sure it's very funny denying children the ability to eat chocolates and toys because they are Palestinian and not Israeli. That's just so incredibly.
Oh, the virtue signal. Oh.
Trivial, incredibly trivial.
The emotional appeals.
And potato chips.
It's working. We're two more virtue signals away from free Palestinian people. Keep going.
It's you trivializing. If it was the other way around, if Hamas was imposing a siege on Israel, which Israeli children were not allowed to do any of that stuff, you would not be sitting here making light of it. It would not be trivial to you because you understand that Israelis are human beings and their children deserve to eat potato chips.
Jewish people.
You do.
Jewish people live in Arab countries around the world.
I don't know what the numbers
but they all left. How many? When we talk about the Nakba and the expulsion of Jews, how many Jews lived in the West Bank after 48?
Thank you for the deflection.
I'm deflecting. You literally said, I'm supposed to. He wouldn't imagine if Hamas owned Israel and the IDF or the Jews were in the Gaza Strip. Well, I can't even imagine that. And now it's well, how would you feel if Hamas was controlling Israel and they were restricting cookies into the Gaza Strip for Jewish children? What the fuck, bro?
I'm just answering your Let him answer about why the blockade exists.
He's not. He's got to do the 52 different talking points
blockade
first.
exists.
Oh my God. Okay.
The blockade exists because they want to punish the civilian population in Gaza.
Kill me.
Putting pressure
Kill
on
me.
Hamas. They're saying as long as we have a government in Gaza that does not play ball with Israel the way the Palestinian Authority plays ball with Israel in the West Bank, the civilian population is going to suffer as a means of putting pressure on them and getting somebody else to be in power. The evidence for that is overwhelming. Children's toys were not allowed in at the beginning of the blockade. And when Israel came under intense pressure after the flotilla incident, a bunch of activists tried to basically force medicines to be delivered to Gaza.
Force medicines? Force medicines? He happens to stumble into another thing. Thank you, Lycan, that I'm incredibly familiar with, and also gives a horrible bad faith summary of what that incident actually was.
Intense pressure after the flotilla incident, a bunch of activists tried to basically force medicines to be delivered to Gaza.
On the flotilla incident, there were 2 of 5 of the ships were empty, and they were aggressive ships that were designed to fight against the IDF when they landed. You realize that footage is available. There's 100-some people on the deck with chairs throwing Israeli soldiers overboard. And makeshift weapons and everything too.
Makeshift weapons. Wow.
I like how Ryan downplays everything. Oh, chairs. Oh, makeshift weapons. Can we roll that video clip? Hello? Can we roll the video clip of the people fighting and throwing the IDF overboard? I like how it's all downplayed on the Israeli side.
Yeah, I know. Well, that was all they could bring from Turkey with them, I guess, because they were inspecting the boats. But those were not peaceful activist ships. And if you read any of the reports, if you open more than Finkelstein book and read what actually happened or watch any of the footage that actually happened,
were on that flotilla.
Were they part of the fighters or what? Were they?
Listen to yourself. Listen to yourself.
What? You can watch the videos.
There were people who, fought back when Israel boarded their ship in an act of piracy in international.
What? They didn't just fight back. They were ready. They were ready to fight back. By the way, I wish I could have. These were the peaceful protesters at the IDF. First of all, they cut the first rope. Just to be clear, they cut the first rope of the helicopter. So this guy's down here. Here's the peaceful activists that are just chilling they've got metal pipes that they've cut out from the boat. They've got chairs that they're using to fight people. I think one of them had a pistol because supposedly one of the IDF soldiers had a 9mm bullet inside of him. Here's the pipes that they're fighting with, where they're trying to attack the IDF soldiers that are landing. This is in the middle of the night, by the way. Here's chairs that they're throwing at them. Let's see if we go a little bit further. I think we can see these peaceful activists, by the way. These were the peaceful activists. We've got one IDF soldier being thrown off the boat. Holy shit. Peaceful activists, by the way.
Why did Israel border the ship?
Because they don't want ships to get to Gaza.
There you go, because there's a blockade and because they announced you need to stop.
They don't get to impose that blockade.
They absolutely do.
No more than Hamas gets to impose a blockade on Israel. This is ridiculous. Of course they don't get to decide what ships get to go.
I want to reiterate by the end here. He's saying that the blockade exists because the Jews are evil to...
No, he's saying they're intentionally...
That's a despicable thing to say.
Really?
I'm not saying anything about Jews. I'm talking about the Israeli government policy being absolutely horrendous.
I'm curious. In the second Intifada, were submersibles or weapons brought in via the water into the Gaza Strip? Did that happen?
What are you talking? Say that one more time.
Were there weapons that were shipped into the Gaza Strip via the Mediterranean?
And plenty of weapons were shipped into Israel as well.
I like the diversion. I like the pivoting.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
so there was. So there were things.
You think one side gets to dominate?
I can't ask a question. I can't finish a single sentence. I can't.
Why is it that Egypt has been a partner with Israel in that blockade since its inception as well?
I've already explained to you why the Egyptian government is interested in restricting
because for 20 years they've just been people.
Yes.
Okay. Everybody is this is consistent at least with history that everybody is collaborators with the West and
governments that are transparently collaborating with the West
has hypnotized the world. Even the Egyptian dictators. Right? Everybody. Yes.
Who else are they collaborating?
I just want to say something. Honestly, there's one thing that I think is really, really important. This, just saying the Jews are evil.
Oh, another virtue signal. Thank God. Let's please get away from the history and let's go back to the virtue signal talking points. Thank God.
It's such a despicable line, and let me explain why. Anti-Semitism is a very, very serious and rising problem in the country, in many other places around the world, especially in the Trump years. We've seen these shootings that have happened at synagogues and everything like that.
Not in the Middle East, it's always been at 100%.
And you have a situation in which Israel's defenders constantly try to conflate those things, is that you ignore the fact that there's a significant portion of the progressive young American Jewish population that is opposed to Israeli policies. And every time you criticize Israeli policy, people say, oh, you're attacking Jews. And that's exactly what you just did. And it's not just harmful to people like me who get smeared by that accusation, completely baseless and really ugly and detestable.
Probably more
but
true
it's
than
also,
we know, I think. But yeah.
That's, yeah.
Of Omar?
Thank you for that wonderful speculation. But it's also
I like how all three of them like handshake me for like accusing me of being anti-Semitic when he's called me like saying racist talking points like 3 times because I'm spewing historical fact. Okay, Chief.
really harmful to Jewish communities themselves that are trying to protect themselves from anti-Semitism to constantly trivialize that charge, that you throw it around at anybody who's critical.
And then the next day, by the way, he's literally retweeting Saka Groiper account, but it's all a coincidence. Coinkydink, I think.
Of Israeli policy, anybody who thinks that Palestinians are human beings who deserve to have rights, you water that charge down so much when you let it around that real anti-Semites get more room.
Do you really think Omar is anti-Semitic? I'm going to be honest. This is a rare moment of vulnerability and honesty for me, okay? And it's why I need to stop covering this Israeli-Palestinian fucking cuck bullshit, dumb fucking conflict, okay? Yeah, I'm starting to look at a lot of people who are Muslim or with Arabic names that talk about this conflict. I don't fucking know when I look at a lot of these people. I truly cannot tell because the anti-Zionist talking points and the anti-Semitic talking points are like a fucking circle Venn diagram in terms of their overlap. Instead of Jews controlling the world, it's Israelis controlling the world. Instead of Jews having the ears of every single leader and controlling the militaries of everything, it's Israelis controlling the military everywhere. Instead of Jews trying to take over and oppress everybody, it's Israelis trying to take over and oppress everybody. It's the talking points are the exact same. It's just applied to Israel instead of just ignoring the fact that Israel hosts some of the most brutal criticism of itself. Again, Haaretz and B'Tselem are from Israel, right? There are NGOs that operate in Israel against Israel. I don't know, man. When I look at a lot of these talking points, I can't really tell. I'm not sure, man. If I was Israeli, I would be mind fucked. I would assume that every Arab person is anti-Semitic. That would be my fucking assumption, but I'm not. I'm an American, so I have a more balanced point of view. So I'm only like 50% in that direction right now.
To breathe and operate because that charge doesn't mean anything. So even if you enjoy smearing people like me and people who defend Palestinians, that's fine. But if you have any part of you that actually cares about Jewish people in this country, I would strongly advise you to stop throwing that smear around at people. Because
okay, I'll do my virtue signal since you did yours. I got asked an interesting question on my way up here from is it Max?
Mac, producer Mac.
Not
yeah.
Not Max, Mac.
He
asked me why I was so interested in this conflict. And one of the things that I think is so sad is I think of all the things that I've ever looked at my entire life, this is one where you can pick and choose facts from one side and you can build the most compelling anti-Palestinian argument or you can build the most compelling anti-Israeli argument. And I don't think I've ever seen anything where you can have such a one-sided telling of the history as I have for this particular conflict. I think the really sad thing here is that I think that there are really good criticisms that can be made of Israel. I think there are really good criticisms you can make of their past policy. And I think that the story of the Palestinian is an incredibly empathetic one. I think that there are reasons why you could support violence in 47, violence in 48, wars in 67. I think you can support all of these things from a really empathetic, understanding place. But the issue is that both sides are so invested in telling their story and making money and making videos and making whatever off of their particular side of things that you never will ever have that conversation. So, for instance, this is why identifying root causes is so important. When we talk about the blockade exists because during the Second Intifada, there was a lot of weaponry that came in to Gaza from the Mediterranean and from Egypt. This is a problem that Egypt recognized, a problem that Israel recognized. That's why the blockade existed, especially after the Palestinian Authority was not able to bring Hamas under control, and Hamas gained control of that region. Israel said, well, fuck this. We're going to...
On point. I don't want to interrupt you. There's one thing.
Yeah?
So before the flotilla incident, they were not allowing certain food items from going in and children's toys. And
then after... was 2008, right?
Yes,
We're talking
that's right.
2008.
Yeah. No, but it's just, I want you to explain to me. And then after that incident and Israel came under pressure, they started allowing a little bit more humanitarian stuff to go into Gaza. Is that because Hamas stopped being a threat to Israel? Or is that because those humanitarian goods are actually not a threat and Israel did not give a shit about them anyway, apart from wanting to punish the
My guess would be it's probably because the Israeli restrictions were too much. And they probably could have calmed the fuck down.
Oh, I shouldn't have even conceded that point. The real truth is because there was probably that element, but also in the background, the Iron Dome was becoming more and more sophisticated as well, which probably also played into it. And I should have focused on that as well. The fact that Israel has gotten so good at defending themselves from these attacks means that they could loosen up the restrictions, not because the rocket attacks stopped. But that's okay. We can grant a little bit on the other side since I've been so aggressive, I guess. But
right now, Israel is in the position it's in because Israel thinks that they can maintain an indefinite status quo and more or less slowly annex the West Bank. That's Israel's goal. The problem with this conflict has always been that Israel wants to fight forever because the longer they fight, the more of the West Bank they get to annex. The only reason the Abraham Accords happened was because it was to stave off annexation of the West Bank. And the problem is that while Israel wants to continue fighting to gain more and more, people like you have deluded Palestinians into thinking that they fight, they can gain more and more too. Only one side, one side of Palestine, whatever that means.
Let me finish.
Only one side of this conflict. What does it mean to you?
Palestinian?
There are a lot of people that became Palestinian after, depending on what the conflict is. So I don't know what that means. I don't really care that much. The idea that both sides can continue to fight only serves one side, and that's the Israeli side. The longer the Palestinians continue to fight, the more the Israelis are going to gain. Because the reality is the Arab states around them are bored. They don't want to fight. The leadership doesn't want to fight anymore. They're not going to. They did at one point, which is, I think, the most tragic thing, is that Palestinians were a tool of the surrounding Arab states to fight with Israel, and that's the most they ever cared about. That's why if you go to these surrounding countries and you ask, that's crazy. There are so many Palestinian refugees here. I wonder why they don't ever take any of them in as actual citizens. And the reason why is because in the Arab states, you're not allowed to. They don't give citizenship to those people because they use them as a tool to fight with Israel. And that's why they're not even allowed to do it. They're banned from actually giving citizenship to any of these Palestinians. So even the whole refugee crisis is inflated more than it should be. But the issue is that when you look at these sides and you go to criticize the policies, okay? I bring it back to the blockade. That blockade existed because weapons were coming in to the Gaza Strip via the ocean, via the land routes. So if that's the reason why the blockade came in, I think that you can make an incredibly powerful argument that, listen, Netanyahu, if you want to destroy Hamas, that's fine. But one of the conditions of eliminating Hamas has to be the lifting of the blockade. Because with Hamas gone, your justification for the blockade is completely and totally non-existent. In my world. In your world, the blockade never leaves because the only reason it's there is to punish Palestinian citizens. So if you're constantly screaming at a government, hey, you need to take this blockade away because you just hate Palestinians, well, why would they ever remove it? There's absolutely no desire to, there's no reason to, why would they? But if the argument is, well, we said that the blockade existed because weapons were going into a hostile administration, well, now that hostile administration is gone and we allow you to remove it at great cost, both to infrastructure and civilian life, well, now we can say, hey, they're gone, you have to lift the blockade now. There's no justification for it. So if we have a real analysis of what's going on, we can levy legitimate criticisms, we can look for legitimate solutions. But if the arguments are delusional, that Israel is here indiscriminately...
I'm glad they let me get this whole point out. I wish I would have had this. I need to do a moment like this early in the debate. The reason why it's so important to understand why the sides are performing bad actions is because if we understand where the root causes of those bad actions are, we can take corrective actions against those bad actions. If the accusation is they want to kill Palestinians because they're evil and hate Palestinians, well, what's the correction then? To make them not hate, you're fucked. But if the actions are these other things that are not intractable, things that can actually be fixed and solved, then, then we've got good reasons to say hey, you can do this, but now you have to do this, right? Because it logically follows.
Murdering tons of people because they're evil or because they hate Jews or they hate Palestinians or hate Arabs or whatever, or they're racist or Islamophobic, there's no solution to be had because in your world, the hatred runs so deep, it's intractable.
Krystal's lipstick just fell over. That's all it was. Don't panic.
So it's funny. Some bits of that narrative actually were kind of close to reality, but just let me fix a couple of things for you. First of all, if you're saying that a precondition for lifting the siege is that Hamas has to not be in power anymore, you have that backwards. The occupation of Gaza existed before Hamas was created. The occupation created Hamas.
Wait, when was the blockade? The blockade wasn't since the occupation.
Yeah, I mean, the occupation itself needed to end. They replaced the occupation with the siege. That's what they did. And
the blockade started in 2005.
Yes. So they withdrew.
It's been occupied since 48.
It remains Gaza has been occupied since 1967.
Gaza's been occupied since 1948.
I will never let I don't care if this is pedantic, I will never let anybody get away with this fucking point. I will never, ever, ever let anybody, I hate this point, and I will never let anybody get away with this fucking point. It drives me crazy.
48.
It remains Gaza has been occupied since 1967.
Gaza's been occupied since 1948.
What are you talking about? Israel took over Gaza in 1967.
Who took over in 1948?
The Egyptians did.
Yes. So it was occupied by the Egyptians.
This is the...
I know you don't like to talk about that because it's not convenient, but that's true. It wasn't a Palestinian state prior to 67.
Who cares? The point is...
Who cares? The Palestinians were. They had a fake government for 1 year that was recalled to Cairo and immediately disbanded. And it became a training ground for Fedayeen.
You weren't allowed to leave the Gaza Strip from 48 to 67 either. You were also locked in there by the Egyptians.
Let me then call for an end to the Egyptian occupation of Gaza too. Oh wait, it ended. Great. So now let's talk about the Israeli occupation of Gaza. It started in 1967. It has continued, and all Israel did is withdraw settlers out of Gaza and replace that settlers on the ground with an occupation from the outside. That's why nearly every international organization still considers Gaza occupied, even after they withdrew settlers and placed it under occupation.
The lack of care of this highlights how it's less about Palestine and more about hating Jews or Israel or I don't know.
According to just about every UN agency, the EU, just the list goes on, and human rights organizations as well. And so the idea then that you need something to change and that Israel would lift the siege in Gaza, frankly, if Netanyahu came and said to Hamas, if you agree to no longer be in power, we're going to let Gaza be completely. You can have an airport, you can have a seaport, you can just have the population live. I suspect Hamas might actually be up for that. In fact, they would consider it a feather on their cap. They can say, see, we've delivered something for you.
Absolutely. But they wouldn't even agree to a permanent ceasefire. What would you think
in exchange for Israel ending the
The most Hamas has even acquiesced to is like a 10-year ceasefire. They haven't even if they got a two-state, I don't think they agreed to a permanent ceasefire.
Devastation of Gaza. They've offered it a million times to release all the hostages. Yeah, they've offered it repeatedly, and
Dave,
it's kind of funny.
Let me to be clear. You're saying that if Israel said they would end the blockade, that Hamas would step down as leadership?
If they were to leave Gaza, absolutely, I think that would actually.
Are you sure that the claim isn't that they need to have a 10-year truce, or that they need to recognize a two-state solution where the refugees are brought back?
This is them as a governing body early on, when they were signaling that they're actually interested in moderating. Khaled Mishal, the head of Hamas,
in the late 2000s. This was before they attempted to coup Abbas's Palestinian Authority, the PLO.
They tried to form a unity thing with the PA, and then they immediately tried to coup the government like months afterwards when Hamas tried to join the Palestinian Authority's coalition in the West Bank. It's just...
I remember this right before the attempted coup.
You don't know what you're talking about. It's so incredible. There was an attempt actually at driving Hamas out of power that they then flipped and pushed the Palestinian Authority out.
You're talking about... I know. I'm sorry. I got this.
As part of a plot that was documented. I think it was Vanity Fair.
That's true, but you're talking about 2005. Yes. There was going to be international support for Fatah. But then Hamas tried to coup the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank a few years later, right after they announced their unity government.
It's great that you've done some reading and you can throw out random factoids. But
why does he get to say this to me? Okay, just because I know everything you're talking about doesn't mean you can dismiss my knowledge. He tried to conflate the two events. Okay, when you talk about the attempted coup of Hamas, that was in the Gaza Strip after Hamas won the elections. But the later coup, when Hamas tried to form a unity government with the PLO for the Palestinian Authority, that was a separate coup. That was a separate attempted coup. That was not the same event. And he's so upset that I know both of these things, and he just says that I know random factoids. What? Because I read too much Wikipedia, or like what's the? I don't understand how you can both bully me for not knowing anything because I'm not an academic and I'm just a wiki retard, but then bully me for knowing the history and then making fun of me because I know what you're talking about. How do I get hit on both sides from the same person?
In the West Bank a few years later, right after they announced their unity government.
It's great that you've done some reading and you can throw out random factoids, but please listen to.
It sucks when the history
I know, but just please try to listen to what I'm saying to you so you can actually understand.
Go back to the broken bones.
Yes. Okay. I'm not trying to throw up random facts that I've read. I'm trying to explain something to you, and I really hope that you would actually just make an effort to listen to what I'm describing.
Okay.
There was an effort by Hamas at the time to try to moderate, and Khaled Mishal wrote a piece in the Washington Post here in the U.S. talking about how, we don't like the idea of a two-state solution, but if we put it to a referendum and Palestinians want it, we'll accept it and whatever. Like there's all kinds of stuff, signs, and what Israel did is put a suffocating blockade on Gaza and said you have to renounce violence, even though Israel does not renounce violence. They said you have to recognize Israel, even though Israel does not recognize Palestine, and they said you have to stick by all previous agreements, even though Israel was obviously not sticking to any agreements they had made with Palestinians in terms of just clearly entrenching the occupation left and right at every opportunity. And so Hamas said, no, those are not acceptable demands. And that's how we ended up being stuck in the situation where Hamas's refusal to accept whatever Israel wants to mete out to them is the reason why that blockade got entrenched and intense and became more and more punishing as a means of trying to place more political pressure on Hamas. And the idea that now if only Hamas would agree to XYZ, then everything would be great in Gaza, there's just no reason to believe that, because the occupation and what Israeli military officials and security officials and political officials were talking about when they actually withdrew from Gaza was very transparently a plot to deny Palestinian statehood. That they're saying this is
okay. Real quick, what would be the name for the if we had a debate strategy where you don't actually respond to what the person is saying, but then you you moralize or you do some other ramble afterwards. Think of like a clever, cute name for what we would call that strategy. Okay, when you refuse to engage. Oh no.
I'm a little behind, but I'm just curious. With all of the thoroughness that you like to employ in this research,
yep.
Can you say for certain that sugar and sodas are then processed to extract the sugar? Cookies and soda, sorry, are they used to process the sugar out of them and then used to make rockets?
That was my understanding. That was the rationalization for the blockading sugar-based products going to the Gaza Strip.
Did you look to see if that was rational? Did you look to see if that's actually possible?
That was the stated reason for the blockade.
That's what was... No, you don't do that because you like to verify everything that's stated. So did you not look into that and see if they can actually pull sugar from that to actually be used as a compound in these rockets?
No, why? Can they not?
No, that's my whole point, though. You don't have the answer to that, and you interrogate everything else.
Then the response should be in a debate to me. Oh, but Destiny, you weren't even able to do that. Nobody's even brought that argument up.
No. That's not. No, I'm coming to you and saying, why didn't you look into that?
Because my basic understanding of chemistry is that extracting sugar from food products is probably a pretty simple process. That'd be my guess. I from the little bit I remember of chemistry, I don't think it's incredibly complicated.
Because when it gets cooked, it gets caramelized. It's no longer sugar. I think it would be a very intense process to get a pure sugar out of these products.
Does it need to be pure sugar?
I mean, when you saw the video that you were watching, they were using actual sugar.
I don't know where that sugar came from. They didn't pour it out of a bag. I don't know if they got that from something else.
It was white and bleached.
So it couldn't have come from anything else? I have no idea. Can you get sugar out of cookies? Chemistry experiment. Few cases want to reduce the sugar, but I'm worried about the ratio of dry ingredients to wet. I want to change too much. I don't know. Oh, reduce the sugar just means getting rid of the sugar. Rocket candy or art candy is a type of rocket propellant for model rockets made with a form of sugar as fuel. Does this tell you how you get the sugar out? Listen, you can go and research this and tell me if it's completely impossible.
I'm just curious why you felt so confident saying that that's the reason without verifying.
Wait, hold on, because I haven't verified every single underlying aspect of chemistry. Like, what's next? What if I say, oh, well, it looks like you can get the sugar out if you do this process. What's your next question? And like, oh, well, did you know if they even had the machines to do that in the Gaza Strip? And then I go, okay, yeah, well, look, I looked it up. They do. Oh, well, did you even know if you had somebody to operate the machines in the Gaza Strip? Okay, well, fuck, let me see if they have those exact people. Oh, they didn't even have those exact
stop.
No. This is an unbelievably pedantic point. Yes, it is.
No, it isn't, because they're talking about these little bit of comforts that these people in Gaza could have, and people were saying, it's kind of fucking ridiculous. They can't have sugar, they can't have soda, they can't have chips, they can't have cookies. And you're saying, well, that's because they can build rockets out of that. And you didn't verify that they actually can build rockets out of those products. But you will interrogate to the nth degree everything that's brought up from the other side.
I don't usually interrogate to the nth degree. Usually I'm just like reading the report. Here's a 7.5 minute video. You know what? We'll watch this on 2x, and we'll see how this guy does it, okay? We'll see what happens, all right?
Hold on.
Hello, I'm William Osmond. On today's episode is Valentine's Day special. We're making rockets out of Valentine's Day candy, and it's a week late because it's cheaper. It's on sale. It's on sale right now. Little candy, and we buy a lot of candy. 12 grams and sugar 11 grams. These are literally sugar packaged in a little bag. Where'd the chocolates go? Chelsea! You're like Golem! Rocket fuel made with potassium nitrate and sugar is typically called rocket candy. We're going to try this with 2 different sugar sources, chocolate and really, really sweet sugar-based, all sugar-based. But this has got a lot of fat in it for fatties on Valentine's Day. 65% potassium nitrate, 35% sucrose. You don't really have a proper scale. So laser cut a little balance.
65% potassium nitrate. Interesting. You bring up the exact rocket fuel thing.
To what you're measuring. So when you put the correct amount against, or with the known weight, it sort of will level out. The sort of forces are equal. So we're going to use the sweetheart as the known weight. So we know how much the whole box weighs. We can count how many in the box and get an average weight. For finding the sugar content of the candy, the nutrition information will tell us exactly how much sugar is in it. Let's use 1 serving of candy for all the sugar, and that comes out to about 158 grams of sugar. The total weight is somewhere maybe 200 grams. I didn't add that up. But that means we need 293.4 grams of potassium nitrate. The problem is these sweethearts weigh like a gram, just over a gram each, and that means we have to do several batches or somehow fit 293 sweethearts on the balance. And I think we should go buy a. Turns out 1 serving weighs.
Hold on, real quick. What? I just want to say, Valentine's candy is going to be made differently than something like a cookie.
Okay, nope, you're done. No. If you find anything,
this is shit. No, stop. No. You were too fucking smart. I didn't take chemistry. You took chemistry. The chemical composition of something is going to change significantly by the way it's produced. Is it not?
Technically, I don't.
Is it not?
Let me answer. Technically, I don't believe you're talking chemical composition at this point, because you're not actually dissolving things into solutions that are transparent. You're talking about mixtures of different types of chemicals that are going to be baked together in a certain way. I don't think you're actually chemically changing the formula of what's going on here. I think you're just changing the way that they're like baked together with each other as like a mixture of different things. So technically, no, I'm not sure there's a significant difference between the chemical compounds here. That's my understanding. But I haven't taken chemistry in like 50 fucking years, so I could be wrong.
Okay, I'm confused. Didn't we just say 150? I'm so confused. Well, good thing about the scale, I would have really screwed that up. It's actually about 100 grams of sugar.
You're too defensive on that one.
What?
I'm sorry, not defensive. You were too confident on that one.
On which one?
The fucking cookie thing. Because it's not just cookies. What about potato chips? What are they getting out of potato chips?
I don't know. Are there sugars in potato chips? It doesn't every single thing.
Significant margin.
Really? What is a significant margin to you?
Oh my. Okay, hold on. How much? Because like a can of soda, right? 36 grams, Mountain Dew, I think it is, right?
Okay.
How much sugar in a bag of Lay's potato chips? There's 1 gram of sugar in a 28 gram serving.
Okay, well, I guess they shouldn't have banned potato chips then.
Debate 1.
Wait, hold on. Are you going to admit that it's possible to make rocket fuel then from candies?
Well, maybe candy. The reason I said, I'm like, wait, he's making this out of candy, not cookies. There's going to be a completely different process for getting that out, and whether or not that can be significantly done.
Can you prove that it's a completely different process?
With the current batch, and it's not
for making candy versus fucking cookies? Yes.
For extracting sugar from cookies versus extracting sugar from candies? Yes.
I'm going to say,
the skills, which is like 75% sugar and 25%
I'm pretty confident it would take different. It'd be different. Like when I Googled the soda thing, you can boil the soda down. We got all this other shit in it. So whether or not it would be a viable compound to then make rocket fuel, yeah, I'd like to know that. Because all you're going to get is this syrupy, once it cools, crystallized fucking shit. And it's not going to be pure sugar.
So we're on like 4 days of filming now, and this shirt actually genuinely is starting to get pretty right. But we've made 2 different sizes of motors and 4 different fuels and some fuses to light the motors. But in order from worst to best, it's
So maybe the process that he does here, maybe you can go further around and it's going to, you know, extract all of it. I'm just saying, I think with very little chemical understanding, just a bit of cooking experience, I'm going to say that extracting pure sugar out of cookies at least is near impossible to any meaningful extent.
Okay, well, that's not my understanding. But listen, if you find anything opposite of that, feel free to shoot me a link and show me, demonstrate that. Yeah.
All right. I'll do some research.
Okay.
Love you, buddy.
I love you too.
This is a strategic move that will be useful for them.
You said as much as yourself.
Someone say extracting pure sugar out of cookies is near impossible.
Yep, that's like it. You can argue with them later. I'm watching this, okay? I don't need a two-hour thing on this. I love you, though.
No, it's not. It's not even that. No, it's you can do that within a day, or maybe a couple days. The main thing with cookies would be to separate the fat, which would be done in a very similar way, which you would separate fat from sugar or any water soluble versus water non-soluble product in any other way in chemistry.
Sure. Okay.
You would have the fat rise to the top. The water which would not be water soluble. The water soluble components would be sugar and other factors which you would separate.
Gotcha. Okay, listen, I believe you. Okay, cool. I don't need a whole thing on this. It's not even a question. Nobody has ever brought this up as a point of contention before, so I don't even know why. I don't even need to go into this. If somebody wants to argue in the future that it's not possible, then I'll dig into the electrolytic fucking hydrolytic process or whatever the fuck chemistry I need to know. But until then, I don't even care. But thank you, I appreciate it though. Okay.
No worries. I've done similar things.
All right.
Okay.
That'll be fun. Bye.
That Israel's goal is to prolong the conflict so they can continue to.
So he's right about that. If I can,
Well, so what are acceptable terms?
Officials and security officials and political officials were talking about when they actually withdrew from Gaza was very transparently a plot to deny Palestinian statehood, that they're saying this is a strategic move that will be useful for them.
You said as much as yourself that Israel's goal is to prolong the conflict so they can continue to.
So he's right about that. If I can.
Well, so what are acceptable terms now? I mean, there are ongoing negotiations happening right now. What should acceptable terms be right now?
For the end of the conflict or for the actual resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
For the end of the conflict.
For this one, Hamas has to go. Ideally, the hostages would come back, but I don't even know if we know how many are alive at this point. I think that Israel initially wanted 40, and now I think, turned it down to 33 because they don't think that there are enough alive that even meet the conditions that they have. But yeah, Hamas needs to go. I imagine, my understanding is Israel still wants to go into...
Destiny doesn't care about proving it, but he does care about citing it as a very important justification for depriving Palestinians of cookies. Mike Hawk, I only have so much time in the day to read about so many things. I already feel like I'm going to sound incredibly arrogant here, and I'm sorry, okay? I already feel like I'm probably the most informed person on this conflict in the entire this media sphere relating to Israel-Palestine, unironically. And that's not even bragging on my research. It's literally shitting on how little research anybody else does. So no, I'm not going to spend my time infinitely diving to the minutia of how to extract sugar from fucking cookies. If somebody calls me out on it and they want to fight on that point, then fine, then we'll go dig down and fight on that point. But there's like a billion other fucking things that I would rather read more about than how to make sugar from fucking cookies, okay? Jesus Christ.
Rafah, right? I think they've reiterated as much. I support it. I think Hamas needs to go. I think that's hopefully they do it without great cost to civilian life. But I think,
and I didn't even bring up the point. They brought up the cookie point.
Has to leave. But I would hope that after Hamas is gone, I think that Israel has to.
Oh, Lonerbox seems like he knows more than me, actually. To be fair for Lonerbox, but I don't think he disagrees with me much. So
change their approach to the area. I think that Israel right now is on the verge of a very strange existential threat where they're getting consumed by their own. I don't know if I would say fear or just they need to in the early history of Israel, the reason why Israel was able to thrive so much and make friends of the West and win wars against the warring Arab states is because they had two arms of military and diplomacy that they wielded both incredibly effectively. Israel was one of the first nations to identify the United States as an important emerging power and to try to win favor with them. Like they did a lot diplomatically and a lot militarily. But I think ever since peace with Egypt, Jordan, the Abraham, I think that Israel is just like, now they don't care. They're just going to try to maintain the status quo indefinitely because on a military level, they're really not threatened anymore. They pretend that it's always an existential threat when it comes to conflict, but that's not true. Hezbollah, the Houthis, and everybody in the Gaza Strip can invade all at once and Israel would bat them away. It's not a huge deal. The existential threat I think that Israel faces now is a political one, is a diplomatic one, because the situation, the status quo is not tenable. And the conditions on October 7th were entirely, I don't want to say like completely foreseeable, but like what do you think is going to fucking happen if you're continuing this status quo over and over and over again? And then the really funny thing is we're so obsessed with they're trying to ethnically cleanse the Gaza Strip. They want to kick Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip. Jews don't care about the Gaza Strip. They want to kick people out of Judea and Samaria. That's what Jews really care about. It's that encroachment into the West Bank. We're not even talking.
That's always funny too. People obsess over this like ethnically cleansing the Gaza Strip point. Jews don't give a fuck about the Gaza Strip. It's this worthless fucking
rectangle of beach, right? The historic land promised to the Jews is Judea and Samaria. It's these huge swaths of the West Bank. That's what Jews, the religious ones, actually care about. And everybody talking about like, oh no, they're gonna take the Gaza. They don't give a fuck about the Gaza fucking Strip.
Think about that anymore because everybody thinks that apparently they want to put settlements back on the Gaza Strip, which historically Israel's never even cared about. So yeah, I mean, Hamas has to go. I would hope that the blockade and the
that's why they were able to pull out. I mean, I think Sharon took a little bit of a hit for it. People weren't as happy about it, but that's why they did pull all the settlements out of the Gaza Strip. It's like, ah, fuck it, who cares?
Israel's never even cared about. So yeah, I mean, Hamas has to go. I would hope that the blockade and the conditions are lessened there, but there has to be huge pressure on Israel and the Palestinians. There has to be huge pressure on both sides to reach some peaceful long-term agreement, because until that happens, it's just going to happen over and over and over again. It's nobody's surprise.
So just when we speak about hostages, I think it's important to note that Israel rounded up tens of thousands of Palestinians, at least thousands.
The administrative detention, those are hostages too. I don't even think I think I was too exhausted. This is not the same thing, but now I feel like that I'm in more agreeable mode. I feel bad if I argue on every point. But again, it's like, it's no response to what I say whatsoever. It's let's move on to the next talking point. It's like, this is like the Palestinian dance. You shift from topic to topic to talking point to talking point. You never actually engage substantively on anything. You just move from talking. I think tonight, when I don't even know why I'm debating this one guy. He's a fucking moron. I need to force, can you concede, can you acknowledge that what I just said was fact before we dance to the next talking point?
So just when we speak about hostages, I think it's important to note that Israel rounded up tens of thousands of Palestinians, at least thousands, I don't want to say tens of thousands, but thousands of them after October 7th. They're being brutalized in Israeli detention facilities. Dozens of them have been killed. Many more have required amputations, and reports of the torture, of the sexual abuse, all this stuff is happening, and you don't get a fraction of attention to Palestinian hostages being held by Israel compared to the conditions that Israeli hostages are enduring in Gaza.
How many have died? I need the answer to that. How many Palestinians have died in Israeli jails?
Which are unknown. And on top of that, you have an Israeli policy of insisting on this path of vengeance in which they have killed infinitely more Israeli hostages than they have rescued. And to continue down this path, it's quite obvious that the Israeli government and Netanyahu himself does not give a crap about Israeli hostages. So just keeping that in back of mind. Now, when we're talking about peace, and it's funny, the reason why I wanted to point out that you've said a lot of things that are actually correct, but you just kind of like missed a key part of it, is that, yes, the longer this conflict goes, Palestinians do lose more and more. And Israel sees that as an advantage. Every day the conflict goes on, they get to take more and more of the West Bank, they get to entrench their control of it, and that's why we desperately need an intervention. And if Israel's not going to do it itself, you need it from the outside. The way to defeat Hamas, if we're serious about not wanting Hamas to be in power, it's extremely simple. Give Palestinians a path to freedom, and they will take it rather than be driven by despair.
Are you saying for the after show? Fuck no.
To supporting groups that insist on doing it the most violent way possible. The truth is, Palestinians tried it with the March of Return. They've tried it with negotiations.
Even if you're right on this, remember what you said about the process being what matters. A correct guess doesn't mean you had the right idea. What are you talking about? In reference to what?
With Israel. They've gone to the UN. The US keeps vetoing every UN resolution that is critical of Israel.
It's probably good to ask Ryan for an update. When he says you're wrong, then tries to fact check and fails. A lot of people missed this and assumed he was right. Oh, true. But that feels really aggressive. I feel bad being a dick, but these people don't feel bad at all. I don't understand what my 5-factor personality is. In some ways, I'm very disagreeable, and then in other ways, I'm way too agreeable. I let people save face. I really don't like destroying people unless they've actually gone really personal on me. If you've gone really hard on me, then I'll try to embarrass you. But if you're reasonably polite, I won't. But they don't give me that same courtesy. It just feels very brutal to be like, Ryan, you said you were looking up that thing about soldiers dropping guns and then being orders to combat. Was that true? But that feels like really, really, really aggressive.
We've gone to the International Court of Justice, the ICC. The US keeps putting pressure on.
I already think you're a dick, so why can't I don't know if they do. Ryan actually DM'd me yesterday or 2 days ago. He DM'd me and he was like, hey, how do you think it went? And I was like, what do you say? Oh, he said, thanks for coming on. What do you think? I said, I thought it went well. Obviously, we're completely opposed in opinion, LOL, but it's always fun to argue. So I don't know, it seems. And then Omar and me, we walked out of the building together, seemed friendly, shook hands, like.
The ICC not to prosecute Israel for crimes. And then when people try to do international...
Please get a haircut. I love my long hair, and I'll never get it cut. It's going to be long forever now. Look at this. Yes. It will be long forever. Stay fucking mad. And this is coming back. I'm going to have my beard back. I'm going to be fucking wilding out, okay? I'm going to be Gandalf out here, motherfuckers.
Solidarity and boycotts. People call that economic terrorism, and you have American politicians trying to pass laws. Just every single method of resistance has been completely quashed. And civil disobedience in Palestine was extremely common against the apartheid barrier that Israel is building throughout the West Bank.
They totally expect Destiny to be unhinged, but I would imagine that they are genuinely pleasantly surprised by his etiquette. No. Because I was nice for the first 2 fucking hours of the Finkelstein debate, and I didn't get any credit for that. So no, I disagree. I don't think that I don't know who even notices that. I think I have to match energy. I was just too passive in the beginning of the Finkelstein debate, but we turned it up.
All these people are basically just end up languishing in Israeli prisons. you've left Palestinians no avenue. And if you want to be serious about defeating, more radical organizations that are committed to violence, all you have to do is give Palestinians a path to freedom that does not push them in the arms of people who insist that fighting is the only.
Didn't that Omar guy literally retweet some Groyper shit just because he was shitting on Destiny? Yeah, but I mean, like, I also tweeted out bringing kerosene to protesters. So. Although I didn't call him out for his, and he tried to call me out for mine. So I don't know.
All you have to do is give Palestinians a path to freedom that does not push them in the arms of people who insist that fighting is the only way. And that has to be stopping U.S. military funding for the Israeli occupation. This occupation is illegitimate. It's indefensible. It's clearly intended to be permanent. Netanyahu has said so. The way it appears on the ground is not some kind of like temporary thing. We're just holding off until every day they're taking more and more of the West Bank. That is what they're doing. They're demolishing Palestinian homes. They're pushing Palestinians out of certain areas that Israel wants. Just the entrenchment of it, we're watching it unfolding, and there should not be another penny spent in support of the Israeli military until that occupation comes to an end. And that's how you can put Israel finally in a position where they have an incentive to start negotiating in good faith, seeing Palestinians as
check my logs, address the Suez Canal and how Israel government wants it. What about it? They don't have it. They're not going for it. They've given it up twice. They've literally given it up twice. What do you want me to say?
Human beings.
Paradoxically, I think that actually would be a boost to Israeli society, because under current Israeli politics, you have some who say we need to compromise. We live here, they live here, we're all going to live here, for hundreds of years. We need to come to some deal. And then you have a faction in Israeli society that says, no, we don't, because we have unconditional U.S. support militarily and politically. So we can just permanent.
The BP comment section is saying that your point on militants not needing to be armed means that the Israeli civilians on October 7th would be considered IDF by your logic. Make it make sense. What? No. Militants not needing to be armed has to do with whether or not the opposition is taking part. Hold on. I can do this very, very, very clearly. When you're looking at a military force, it has to be engaged in military actions. And insofar as that's happening, you can consider them members or parties to an armed conflict. So, for instance, let's say that we go into Israel as an IDF soldier. Okay, let's say that it's the year is 2000. Let's say we walk into the Gaza Strip as top secret as an IDF soldier, and let's say that we spot an armed member of Hamas. He's holding a rifle. Okay, and he's got a label on his chest and it says, "I want to kill Jews." And he's got a rifle and he's standing there. Okay, and he's looking around and he's standing there. And let's say that you, as an IDF super soldier, you shoot and kill that guy in the head. Okay, and then you sneak out. That would not be acceptable because he's not a member to an armed conflict. Even though he might be part of an oppositional military, even though you guys might not be on good terms, even though you might go to war in the future, you're not currently involved in an armed conflict. You can't walk in and just kill members of an oppositional military just because they're part of the military. So that would be illegal. Even if he was a Hamas soldier, even if he was armed, even if he had a thing saying, "I want to kill Jews," and you went and killed him, you can't do that. However, let's say that, so on the flip side, let's say that every single Israeli citizen was a fucking soldier. Let's say that they were all part of the IDF and they all, at all points in time, if you invade Israel and start killing people who aren't they don't know there's an armed conflict happening right now because it's a sneak attack, that would be a violation of the law of armed conflict. Now, on the other side, let's say that there is an active, ongoing armed conflict, and let's say that you are engaged in trying to help your side out. Let's say you're just a spotter or whatever, you don't have guns or anything on you, and somebody blows you up or kills you, you're a party to that armed conflict. You can be killed. It's okay to kill you at that point. It depends on whether or not there's the current existence of an armed conflict going on. There's a current existence of a conflict between two states or a non-state actor and a state. It can be non-state actors. And then if you're a party to that conflict or not, meaning you're engaged in active hostilities. That was one of the reasons why the United Nations, actually not the United Nations, let me be more precise. That was one of the reasons why the International Criminal Court said that it's possible that Israel engaged in war crimes when they killed people as part of that flotilla incident. Not because what they did was super morally wrong in terms of the people that got killed or whether in terms of the people getting killed, but because the flotilla incident, when they did their legal analysis, they said that the flotilla people probably couldn't be seen as members that were parties to the armed conflict between Hamas and Israel. So any soldier killing any of those people would have been considered a war crime, regardless of if they were justified or not, because these people aren't parties to this armed conflict, and it wasn't being looked at as a policing event. So that's, yeah. Okay.
Quote unquote, manage the conflict, and voters look at that and they say, well, it's true. The U.S. does unconditionally support. So
how would you ever do surprise attacks by that logic? I don't think you're technically allowed. I mean, I'm pretty sure all surprise attacks, I think those are would be considered contemporaneously violations of armed conflict, would be my guess. So on June 5th in 67, the start of the 6-Day War was Israel flying all of their planes over to go and bomb the Egyptian airfields. I'm pretty sure that would be a violation of law of armed conflict. I think when you blow all those people up because you're not technically at war, it would be my guess. But
why should we actually make any compromises, and it has driven them into this this cul-de-sac that is potentially suicidal for the entire project.
I think the issue is that people don't realize that the way that Israeli opinion flipped so hard on peace for Palestinians was after the Second Intifada. That completely mind destroyed so many Israeli people when they saw so many Palestinians across the entire country engaging in violence against Israeli.
I need to memorize conflicts. I need to memorize attacks in the beginning. I should have brought up the Ramallah killing. Second Intifada attacks, memorize.
People, a lot of them were like, this is it. Like, apparently these people just don't ever want peace. After that, I think that's when you saw the government start to shift a lot to the right. And the issue is that it doesn't feel like there has been that Palestine.
They were already sending attacks on Israel for a while, though. Does that not matter? It wasn't like a formal war. No. Before 67? No.
Palestinian leader that's been ready to come up and actually.
So ambushes are only okay if a conflict is already broken out. If a conflict is already declared, then both sides are considered parties to an armed conflict, and then now your armed conflict rules come into play. Technically, yes. But also keep in mind that like it's complicated because in the Middle East, like nobody is really playing by any rules, right? The Yom Kippur War started that was a surprise attack in 73. It was like, oh, here we are, revenge for 67, motherfuckers. So like technically that started off, I would say probably as a violation. Well, is there a formal declaration? Let's see. Are surprise attacks violations of armed conflict? There's that one website that does a lot of write-ups on. Oh, whoa, nice. So we have a rule for it. Each party to the conflict must give effective advance warning of attacks which may affect the civilian population unless circumstances do not permit. Ooh, okay, never mind. This is already in war. This has to do with your obligation to warn opposing parties, if possible, if it doesn't compromise an operation, that you're going to attack somewhere so that civilians have time to flee. Okay, I don't. Maybe I'll look for a specific write-up of this. But my understanding is a surprise attack probably wouldn't be allowed because you're not part of an armed conflict yet.
And the issue is that it doesn't feel like there has been that Palestinian leader.
I think that surprise attacks are still considered war crimes, right? Pearl Harbor technically was because there was no declaration of war. Well, Pearl Harbor doesn't count because we didn't have war crimes yet. Because Pearl Harbor was in what, like the 1800s? Wasn't that like 1827 in Cuba? I don't know, truthfully, I don't know if Pearl Harbor would have counted because it technically, being serious, it did predate the creation of the International Criminal Court, and it did predate the ICJ and like declaring things as war crimes or not, number one. And number two, I'm not sure if the United States would have counted as a party to the armed conflict yet due to their supplying of the Soviets with material. I don't know the answer to that. Because also, I could be wrong, but didn't the United States, for World War II, weren't we not supplying the evil side, the Axis? Not the Axis. What the fuck were the Nazi side? Yeah, it was the Axis in World War II. Yeah, we weren't supplying these guys with things, and we were supplying the other side with things, right? Or I'm pretty sure. So I don't know if you would have considered the United States like parties to the armed conflict on one side or not. But also again, all of this predates like these types of. Well, it predates any modern understanding of these types of rules, so I don't know what the analysis would look like. We embargoed Japan? Okay, yeah.
It's been ready to come up and actually make brave concessions or strong concessions.
Yeah, hold on. Real quick. Everything that exists in contemporary international law, or a lot of it, law of armed conflict, international humanitarian law, will have things that predate it that also apply to things. So somebody in the YouTube chat says, the Third Hague Convention of 1907 prohibits surprise attacks without a declaration of war. So it's possible that something was made illegal as part of a convention in like 1948, but there might have been a predating document or convention that also said it was illegal too. That's why I'm saying I'm not 100% sure. I don't know. There could be things predating the conventions that I'm aware of that lead into those conventions. So.
Because start to shift a lot to the right. And the issue is that it doesn't feel like there has been that Palestinian leader that's been ready to come up and actually make brave concessions or strong concessions, because every deal with a Palestinian feels like a concession. It was not all of Israel. I just don't think Palestinians...
All of the occupied territories, just to be technical.
Which occupied ones?
The West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, the internationally recognized occupied territories that Israel has to withdraw from. That's what Arafat has said, and that's what Abbas has said. I'm a fan of neither of these men. But they're not the obstacle to peace. They made very clear that they would accept a deal if Israel actually ended the occupation.
Arafat
Israel
has never accepted a deal.
Of course he has.
There are no deals on the table. There are no deals left on the table where the Palestinians we would just have accepted this.
I happen to be familiar with a private conversation between Bill Clinton and somebody that I know, an advocate, in which Bill Clinton...
It feels like dick waving, but I wanted to bring up, okay, and I've spoken to Shlomo Ben-Ami, who is literally the lead Israeli negotiator on these. But okay, but I don't dick wave.
Said that Arafat just kept saying, 22% is my offer, and Bill Clinton had no idea what he was talking about. And the person who was talking to him explained to him 22% is the percentage of the land that is illegally occupied by Israel. Arafat was telling.
I also hate this telling because this isn't true either. Going into it's funny that he says this because going into the Camp David negotiations, one of the big deals was they had no idea what the Palestinian side wanted, and the Israeli side had no firm offers when they went in. And this is one of the things that Shlomo talked to me when we were chatting at the airport, and I asked him about this, and he was like, yeah, the big deal for Israel was when they went in, we had no idea what we were even going to offer. So we started with one thing, then we offered another thing, then we offered another thing, and we offered another thing. And it seemed like if you're on the Palestinian side, we'll just wait. They'll just keep offering us more and more and more. And that was one of the huge issues. You might read about this in his book too. There's one of the huge issues going into those negotiations is that like Israel had never had a firm position. So it always seemed like if the Palestinians waited more, they could always get more and more if they would just wait. Yeah.
Telling you, and the occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, that was the counteroffer repeatedly.
That
and Israel
has never been the counteroffer.
It has
That's not true.
It's the entire basis of the peace process.
That was not in 2000. No, absolutely not. They just,
Arafat in the late 80s recognized Israel, so he effectively conceded Israel on 78% of historic Palestine as legally defined.
Recognized, yes.
Yes, and Israel then, if you wanted to call his bluff, all you had to do was end the occupation and see what happens. But Israel didn't. Israel entrenched the occupation. That's the pattern. And you're also missing something about the regional dynamic. You're talking about the Abraham Accords and all of that. Just to be clear, the entire Arab world, first it was Saudi Arabia, put on the table something called the Arab Peace Initiative, effectively, and the occupation will get recognition from us.
Nope.
And then
what was the huge part of the Arab Peace Initiative they're not bringing up there?
You tell me which
It
part.
was the infinite right of return for every single Palestinian refugee.
See,
That's the Arab Peace Initiative.
You're confused about
you
the
negotiate
This
that.
is no. That's a non-negotiable. That was one of the reasons why the after Camp David, after the Clinton parameters, after the Taba Summit, that was the statement left in rejection of the Clinton parameters, where they said we as negotiators,
we are never going to give up the right of return for the refugees.
will never give up the
right
right of Arabs
you are wrong.
to be repatriated.
What was offered in that Arab Peace Initiative, first it was Saudi and then it became the Arab League, it said a just resolution to the Palestinian refugees.
Which has always meant.
And that phrasing, no, it has not always meant that.
God.
That phrasing was specifically designed when we talk about a two-state solution and a just resolution to the refugee issue. It's not saying and the full right of return. That was considered a Palestinian compromise. Like many Palestinians are unhappy with it on the grounds that it doesn't say the full right of return.
I need to memorize this talking point better. That Arab Peace Initiative, that was in 2002? And I think this was in, this refers to another, resolution that references the right of return. Let me check. Did I make this up? Oh, there it is. Resolution 194. Refugees wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors should be permitted to do so at the earliest practicable date, and that compensation should be paid for the property of those choosing not to return and for loss or damage to property which, under principle of international law equity, should be made good by the governments or authorities responsible. It's calling for the big right of return, right? This came in 1948, okay?
It only says
What do you think a just resolution is?
A just resolution, one in which it's understood that you would allow for a two-state situation to happen, means Israel recognizes that they drove those Palestinians out. A small symbolic number gets to return to Israel proper, and then the majority of them end up in a Palestinian state.
That's a lie. That's bullshit.
That was the loose formula. That if you look at
it was offered in 2000.
It was not what was offered in 2000.
It literally was. There was an international fund that Israel was going to contribute to. Yep. There was some number. Yes. I saw anywhere from 10 to 100,000. I don't know what the actual number was. There's some number that
along
they were
with
going
an
to
end to the occupation. That's basically what Palestinians have been asking for. And if you look at actual details of it, and I'm happy again to tweet about it afterwards. I'm happy to send you all the links that you need. That was what the Palestinian official position was.
There was no official position.
Let me just respond to one of the things that a point that you made earlier in the form of a question that a lot of people I've seen it out there, so I think it's worth kind of trying to answer directly. Said it can't be a genocide because they've only killed 33,000 people. If they wanted to do a full genocide, they have the capacity, they have the bombs to kill all 2 million plus people. So
it's kind of a meme argument, but
so 1/5 of their population, right?
Right. Why wouldn't they do it? And so one, you'd say, well, 13,000 children, far too many. But more importantly than that, you would say they've killed the number that they can sort of get away with at this point.
This is such a bullshit talking point.
Killing and death. The goal is domination.
When you say that, like, you killed the number of people you can get away with, that makes sense. So what? The number of people that wouldn't be considered a genocide? Like, is that what we're talking about, or?
And the ethnic cleansing of the region, the clearing out, the thinning out of the population. And so you don't actually need to kill 2 million Palestinians if you can drive hundreds of thousands of them to other countries.
If you're talking about genocide, you can have a genocide with 100 people theoretically. The number of people killed isn't important. The intention is important. But it's hard to make an argument for genocide.
Right, we're not setting aside genocide.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, like the
but I mean, that's what you. Oh, okay.
Attacks happened in response to.
But that would be the answer to the question: why haven't they killed more?
Yeah, I guess, but the problem is just absent any. There just isn't strong. It's the weirdest genocide ever. If you're dropping a leaflet saying, "Hey, flee to the south. Most of the military activity is going to come to the north," or "Hey, we're working with 52 organizations trying to open up borders and crossings to get more humanitarian aid."
Hamas is generally in the south. Why did they bomb the north?
Hamas is generally Hamas is everywhere.
No, Hamas's like military stronghold has always been the south. So
is that true? That could be true. I've never heard that talking point before. I know that right now there's a lot of them that are supposed to be in Khan Yunis. Is that true that Hamas is generally in the south? I know they operate, for instance, out of Al-Shifa, and they have for a long time. There are decades old reports on this. Is it true that they're just like, maybe they are, but I mean, like, what is this talking point? Like,
Al-Shifa, there were literally 900 people that they
What happened to that? By the way, what happened to that 3-story 3D rendering?
Also, I like the no response to any of my points ever.
Of a command center that we saw under Shifa Hospital.
The one with do you mean the one where they released the footage of the massive tunnel, the bomb shelter?
There are tunnels in Gaza, but where was the command center that we're all told existed?
When you're saying command center, are you looking for like a
I'm
2001 Space Odyssey?
I'm not the one that said
U.S.
command
intelligence
center.
has corroborated everything that Israel said, and they said they arrived at
Oh, that's nice of the U.S. intelligence.
Well, listen, if you believe Russia and Hamas instead of the United States and Israel, I can't help you. Hold on. If you want to believe, hold on, actually, wait, I'm curious. If Hamas were to make a statement about a particular thing, would you believe that more than the United States and the IDF corroborating their statements? Who would you believe more on that?
I don't think you can trust either of them.
What a stupid answer. What a stupid answer. Stupid.
So
you think it's equal amounts of trust?
I think, yes, that's about
equal amounts of distrust.
That's an unbelievably stupid statement.
Okay,
so we believe we have the
government's generous.
Wait, hold on, I'm curious. Who do you trust then for third-party verification?
Human rights organizations report.
We report things from the IDF and from Hamas.
Yes, they look and they do independent investigations as well, and they do comparisons.
They're independent investigators. Have you ever read how they actually come up with the numbers? They'll call a hospital and say, "What's your list of people that are dead?" And then they look at the registry and they go, "Oh, well, it seems like the names exist." And then they write it. That's it.
It's the same thing that you do with polling and population counting and stuff. You take samples and based on that you extrapolate. You can't go and investigate every single last thing that happens.
Doing sample work and all of that would be interesting. That's not what they do. If you read how these NGOs actually, then they conclude their methodology on the reports. You can read it. They'll say, this has been third-party investigated. Hamas has 10,000, but also these guys actually third-party verified. And then when you read their methodology, they say, we contacted the Gazan Health Ministry and they told us this. Like,
you know what's really interesting is that every time the human rights organizations try to go and investigate, Hamas says we welcome a full investigation. The Israeli government tries to block human rights organizations.
They welcome a full investigation. This is when Amnesty International go down and interview people and they say some of them were kind of nervous to talk to us. Why isn't Hamas open any archives so that we can externally validate what's going on in that country?
The amount of nonsense you spew is just it's incredible.
What did I just say that was nonsense?
Hamas has reported on multiple occasions that they have basically verified the credibility of the people who are talking to them, that they are talking to because they have been willing to criticize Hamas and say we disagree with Hamas is doing, we disagree with the foreign.
Oh shit! I thought of the head surgeon in the Al-Shifa hospital here, and his statements were incorrect. He lied about this. Please, do I bring this up? That just popped in my head when I was in this debate.
They are repressive. So they talk to Palestinians who are perfectly willing to criticize Hamas for being terrible, but then they say, but it's not true that they were hiding in our house or used human shields or whatever. So that's how you know.
Oh God, it's such a good talking point. I must bring it up.
When you compare those narratives, it's the Israeli narrative that is completely baseless.
Do you acknowledge
because they say that they're willing to talk to international investigators, but the lead surgeon at the Al-Shifa hospital and other doctors there said, oh, Hamas never uses this hospital. We've never seen terrorists here. The UNRWA people were like, oh, we had no idea there was a huge tunnel that they were coming in and out of next to our building every single fucking day. We had no clue.
Real quick. Do you acknowledge that Amnesty International has said that they store munitions in houses? Have you acknowledged that?
I'll tack on to that.
Houses, which is a very important difference.
This is from earlier this month.
Unoccupied houses. I thought this was the most densely populated place in the world. Are there a ton of empty houses that they're operating? And then if he says empty houses, oh, so they can operate not out of civilian areas. What?
Interrogation of an Islamic Jihad fighter, and I'm genuinely curious. This is not a leading question at all. Asked by the interrogator of this Israeli interrogator of this Islamic Jihad fighter. In Israel, that's what I'm asking. Yeah, in Israeli detention.
Engages in torture.
Asks which hospitals Islamic Jihad and Hamas operate in. He says all of the hospitals.
Yeah.
Now, Omar, to Ryan's point, what's your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, just when you look at the levels of torture that happen inside Israeli detention, it's just you can't take anything at base value of what comes out of any confession.
Does he acknowledge the tortures that happen in Al-Shifa? I should have asked him this. Do you acknowledge that?
That come out from people who are being interrogated by Israel. And so that, to me, is completely meaningless. Yes, if you put me in an Israeli interrogation center, I might also confess to whatever the hell the Israeli military wants me to confess to.
Do you acknowledge that Al-Shifa hospital was inhabited by a fuck ton of fighters a month ago when they did that massive raid?
Inhabited by a fuck ton of fighters, I think I can't verify.
They were inhabited
by any fighters?
Yeah.
There were 900 arrested.
I don't know that.
500.
Yeah,
let me answer!
There were mass graves near the Al-Nasser hospital that were filled with people who are wearing
the ones where people have been buried there 4 months earlier?
With their hands tied behind their back, zip tied.
No,
can you explain to me what threat people who have
the initial reporting by Al Jazeera was completely and totally debunked by people that were analyzing geolocation.
He asked this and it's a setup, and I should have realized that was a setup when he said, who debunked this? Now, I like how he gets mad at me for using a Twitter account that verifies with videos and geolocations and external sourcing on every single thing they say, but we can't trust the Twitter account. And then earlier he's like, but we also can't trust the United States and we can't trust the IDF. Who the fuck are we supposed to trust?
The reporting by Al Jazeera was completely and totally debunked by people that were analyzing geolocators and OSIN account on Twitter that has looked at a ton of videos. You can look through every single video.
So by a Twitter account is who debunked those?
Is that we're doing it by a Twitter account? You can look at all the videos yourself. If you don't trust the IDF, you don't trust the United States. Who do you trust? Just Hamas?
I trust human rights organizations whose job is to investigate these things.
Okay,
That's
well,
who I trust.
I don't think any human rights organization has said 100%. We found
yeah,
Al Jazeera has re-reported what Hamas has said.
They can't say it's 100% because Israel will not let them in, and they can't actually go in and investigate.
In a current active war zone. For Al-Shifa, do you acknowledge that there was a huge 2-week fight there between the IDF and militants?
Yes, near Al-Shifa Hospital, I think there was a fight.
And Al-Shifa Hospital.
Yeah, I don't know that it was inside the hospital. Certainly, there were horror stories of what was happening inside the hospital.
Well, it was a 2-week fight. Do you think they were fighting civilians?
There's
2 weeks?
There's a very clear.
I don't like. She's not against me, but I feel like every time she comes in, she's like saving Omar from having to like actually answer a question. But
disconnect here.
Yes.
That is probably a good point to not start getting to, but like if we want to wind down here. Stephen, you said that Palestinians fundamentally don't want peace. It sounds to me also, Omar, like you think fundamentally the Israeli government, as it is right now, does not want peace. I think we can both agree that there's civilians in the Palestinian territories and in Israel that would like to live in peace.
Can I mean, just real quick, if I've said that, it's not peace. Nobody wants peace. That's a thing that we say in the West because we have no concept of what anybody's looking for. People want justice, right? In Ukraine, they could end the war right now for peace, but they want their territory. They want justice.
Right,
Palestinians could say, listen, we're going to go with whatever plan where we're broken up into 20 enclaves and have peace. They don't want peace. They feel like they've been expelled from their homelands with international support for Israel for no reason. They want justice. So to be clear, everyone wants justice.
Right,
yes.
so they don't want peace.
Yes. Well, what is the MLK quote? Like
I need to memorize this quote. Like an uneasy tension. They prefer a negative. What is it? A negative peace to a positive justice or some bullshit. I don't know.
White moderate one that says where some people prefer an uneasy peace or whatever to an uncomfortable tension or whatever. There's ways to make things peaceful, but people want more than that on both sides, and they should. I just think that
and I think tell me if you in the end agree with the point that I was making earlier, because I haven't heard a counter to it, that the way to defeat the ideology of Hamas is through peace, not through war.
Now I will sound racist. I don't want to sound racist, but there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the way that Arab states and Arab people in the Middle East view Jews and Israel. And to just assume that being nice and peaceful, as in there is a whole mythos, a whole mythology. This would have been super fascinating to listen to Finkelstein expand on if he was capable of more than insults and ad-homs, but there is a completely and totally different retelling of history from that region from the 1880s and onwards. And as long as those histories are separate from each other, there is no reconciliation that can ever happen.
I shouldn't even take this seriously, but if Arabs are just fundamentally racist.
Hold on, wait, hold on.
I like that. It was like, oh, I can't even take this seriously. Oh, what? You think that Arabs have a totally different understanding of Jews and Israel? Oh, that's impossible. I can't even believe we're going to talk. Like, oh my God. It's like a basic fucking fact. There wouldn't be a single person, I don't even think outside of the United States, let alone like the Western world, even outside of the United States, I don't think a single person would deny that fact. Yeah, obviously, of course, Arabs have a totally different view of history about Israel than the entire like Western world does. Like,
I shouldn't even take this seriously, but if Arabs are just fundamentally racist.
Hold on, wait, hold on. I mean the citizens that live in these places.
Okay,
and like
if the citizens that live in these places are just fundamentally racist, why is it the case that when peace is close at hand, support for Hamas and armed resistance plummets?
Well, because I think that
if they're fundamentally just opposed,
I'm saying they're fundamentally, when they look at Israel and the Jewish people there, the view from a lot of Arabs is.
But why does their view change when peace gets closer? Wouldn't it be the opposite if they fundamentally just want to fight with Israel? Wouldn't they actually be more bloodthirsty as peace approached? Yet opinion polls consistently show that support for armed resistance plummets as peace becomes more possible.
Why did you hold on to racism rightfully rather than Islam more accurate, which is embedded Jew hatred, and in case of Hamas, official in the charter speech by the leader? Because get triggered, and I know this triggers the fuck out of all of you, even you fucking Jews. I don't care. I think it is a regional more than a religious conflict. I think that the religion like amplifies it, and you can call for your jihadist bullshit or all that, whatever, to make it feel even stronger. But I think that the conflict is largely the fact it originated from having European white people coming into what is supposed to be your giant Arab country. That's what started all of this off. Now, I think as of recently, especially with Hamas over the past few decades, I think it's taken on a much more strongly religious flavor. But I think that the huge instigating moment for it was basically Europeans coming into the Middle East and then people getting ultra ass mad about it. By people, I mean all the Arabs that lived in the region.
Reverse of what would happen if they were fundamentally a violent
there's
racist
two things. So
people.
one, you said it correct earlier that even though countries have foreign peace, a lot of the Arabs in these countries still don't like Israel and still don't like the Jews. So that's one thing that even through peace, that opinion has remained consistent. You said that it is true.
They're chomping at the bit to normalize with Israel.
The what?
These Arab countries are chomping at the bit to normalize with Israel.
You're going to say it's the leaders, right? Yes, that's true.
In your case, also the contradiction is quite palpable.
Which is?
On the one hand, everybody in the region is just fed up with the Palestinians and they're just eager to make peace with Israel. And now it's like the problem is that the people in the region just don't like Jews. See,
well, no, it's
like which one is it?
Well, it's both. I think that over time, sure. So
I'm explaining.
One is sometimes brave leaders are the people that are needed to make progress towards peace. This might come in the form
towards justice or peace.
Towards justice, whatever. Towards like bilateral.
You haven't answered that question though. When peace becomes closer, in the moments where there's news that a deal is getting closer.
Yes.
support for armed resistance among Palestinians goes down.
I agree.
That's
This
the
is true for everyone.
reverse
Yes. No.
of what would be the case if
I don't understand where this talking point or why. I guess I need to be. I don't know. This must have been like a big thing, or YouTubers are talking about this, or somebody brought this up, or there must have been a poll or something. Like I don't understand what the fuck this talking point is. Like polls can change incredibly quickly in response to different conditions on the ground. I don't know what the fuck the point of this is. It's some like silver bullet argument.
Jews and just wanted violence.
We have to tease apart. When I say that they fundamentally have these opinions, I don't mean that they want to fight and go to war forever. I'm just saying that there is an Arab mythos around Jews that all of them basically believe in terms of their European transplants that have unlimited support from the West for whatever action they want to do, and they don't belong there. And then there's like a different telling of historical events that happen. That doesn't mean that peace is impossible. It doesn't mean that there's not ways to work out. We've seen peace treaties have happened. They just require very strong leadership, and sometimes those leaders even have to pay the price. So, for instance, when Sadat made peace with Israel, he was assassinated because they thought he was a Western sellout. And it happened to the Israeli leader as well, who was also assassinated by a far-right Zionist for that peace deal. So peace is possible. It takes really strong, great leadership to do it. Arafat was never that leader. You should feel that especially
I'm not a fan of Arafat, but
Arafat was never that leader. Abbas isn't that leader either.
He certainly was not a rejectionist as far as.
Here's what I want to do. I want to toss to Omar for closing thoughts, and then we'll go back to you, Stephen.
Sure.
Omar.
All right. So when we talk about just set up the regional.
I can't believe I'm so happy because I'm like, okay. Dude, I can't believe I get cucked every single way. I do. I literally get cucked every way. Because I'm like, oh, cool, she's giving me the last word. And so my thoughts are, okay, well, if I'm getting the last word, I'll just let him yap, because at least then I get to yap. But then he interrupts my yap. Well, fuck, I should have interrupted his yap.
And then we'll go back to you, Stephen.
Sure.
Omar.
All right. So when we talk about, just set up the regional dynamic real quick. You have the region in general, the people of the region are extremely furious at the way Israel treats Palestinians. That is the primary reason behind the hostility that exists towards Israel, is because people see day in and day out on their TV sets what is happening, unlike in the United States where you can barely see that kind of thing on mainstream media.
You mentioned you talked to Shlomo in an airport. I think you meant to say Benny Morris. No, I had a call with Shlomo because we were going to set up a chat, and I never emailed him back. I should fucking. But the Israel trip came up, and then the Iran bombing came up, and he was out of town, so I need to email. I just don't know I need to figure out what to talk to him, because I don't want to just have him on for like 5 minutes. But I had like a 30-minute call with him, and I never.
Al Jazeera does broadcast what Israel is doing to Palestinians, and they get a very, very clear and accurate view of what Palestinians are suffering under. And so the people in the region are in solidarity with Palestinians against that brutal occupation, against their displacement, the ethnic cleansing in slow motion that happened, and in some cases not in slow motion in particular periods in Israel's history. And they see this fundamental injustice day in and day out, and that level of racism, and they're enraged by it. But you also have a lot of governments in the region that are US clients. They're on the US team in the loose sense of the word. And this is uncomfortable for them. They want this conflict to end because they would rather be on better terms with Israel and the United States. They want that dynamic to end. And so they also want this conflict to end, which is why we had things like the Arab Peace Initiative. They want to see just an end to the occupation, just give the Palestinians something. Can we please make this work? And Israel faced that with complete and total rejection over and over again, because you have the political end of this, the political spectrum within Israel right now is just completely off the charts. Yes, you have some super progressive marginal leftists in Israel. You've got the Palestinian citizens of
Israel. You need
Israel.
to paint a better picture with your talking points in a way that's attractive instead of only dismantling the other side. I feel like I did that a few times in this conversation. It's hard when I get cut off constantly, but I feel like there were several times where I was like, here's the whole picture. Here's how things could be better. I did it in explaining the end of the embargo. I did it in explaining having differences between understanding both sides. I feel like I did it a few times, but it's hard when I'm getting cut off by everybody constantly.
Who serve in the Israeli Knesset and so on. And they have no power effectively in Israeli society. And the bulk of it ranges from the Netanyahu-Ben Gvir coalition, which is stomp Palestinians until no end and brutalize them in the worst ways possible and hopefully throw them out and finish the Nakba, towards the other liberal end of the spectrum in the Israeli sense, which is just maintain permanent occupation, but let it be a humane occupation. Let's just, control them and let everything be fine. And yeah, we won't give them full rights, but they can at least, have some economic activity and whatever, normalize a little bit. That's the spectrum, and that spectrum will never allow for peace to exist, because no people anywhere in the world would accept to live without the fundamental right to be free. And that's what's missing here. And because you do have a dynamic right now where peace cannot emerge in direct negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians, because yes, there's a lot of intense feelings right now, but on top of that, there's a significant imbalance of power that if you leave them, you're going to end up with a repeat of previous peace negotiations, which is Israel saying, yeah, let's negotiate, while on the ground they do whatever the hell they want. Keep entrenching the occupation, eating up more land, brutalizing Palestinians more, but saying, hey, we're negotiating. It's all a charade. And what you need right now is pressure from the outside. I don't care whether you like Palestinians or hate them, or you think they're this or that, or same with Israelis. It's besides the point. You have a reality right now in which Palestinians are living under permanent apartheid. Occupation and apartheid, and this particular episode in Gaza right now is a genocidal episode. As an emergency, we need to put an end to this Gaza episode, but the situation was not acceptable even before the onslaught that is unfolding in Gaza. You have a situation in which Israel denies Palestinians the right to live in their own state and denies them full rights even under the areas that Israel controls. So they're stuck forever, either as subjects with no rights, and they can either take that and be happy with it, or if they try to fight back in any way, then Israel will just escalate its violence to levels that are absolutely horrific. Those are the choices that Palestinians face. And it requires external intervention. It requires the world to isolate Israel and say, this is not acceptable. This occupation cannot end. You have to end that occupation. And that means that you don't get another penny, no diplomatic relations, no embrace of Israel until there's a change in Israeli policy. And when you look at Russia and Ukraine right now, we've had a very brief episode of that, comparatively speaking, when you compare the two things. There are instances in which Ukraine, for example, I think it was December, fired a rocket at Belgrade and killed a couple of dozen Russian citizens, including 3 children. If in response to that, the United States said Putin has the right to defend himself and we're going to give him unlimited arms to fight against Ukraine, everybody would just laugh at you instantly. You would be laughed out of the room because that's such a ridiculous thing to say. So pointing at...
Like, this happens in the middle of an actual fucking war. What is this point? Oh, God. But I did interrupt him because it's his final point. It's his final statement. It's such an unbelievably stupid fucking example.
Hamas violence and saying that the response is we give Israel unlimited weapons to defend themselves. When the broader context is Israel is invading and occupying Palestinians and robbing them of their basic rights and brutalizing them and killing them and imprisoning them and torturing them, that in this context, you're going to refer to Israel's right to self-defense is a joke. A home intruder who breaks into somebody's home with a gun does not get to claim self-defense.
Every shitty fucking analogy, every shitty fucking metaphor, every shitty fucking...
house, if the people inside that house get to fight back. Palestinians are fighting for their land that Israel is not entitled to taking. Israel does not belong there. And it's time to isolate Israel until that occupation comes to an end. And that's the only path in which we're going to see Israel moderate. The reason why sentiments in Israel are so extreme is because the U.S. has provided complete and total impunity for Israel. Nobody can ever hold Israel accountable for anything they've done because the U.S. ensures that that accountability cannot happen. And that's precisely why we've seen the Israeli spectrum move to an extreme. And in response to that brutal extreme that is imposed on top of Palestinians, you're seeing more extreme views also occurring among Palestinians. The corrective is incredibly obvious and is impossible to miss if you're being intellectually honest and understand what's actually unfolding.
And so your last word, wouldn't cutting off U.S. military aid and blanket unconditional political support push Israel toward a compromise?
I don't think we have blanket unconditional support for Israel. I think if they were to do certain things, I think they would lose, they'd lose internal support pretty quickly. A lot of the people you like to quote, Haratzer B'Salem, are literally posted in Israelis or Israeli organizations. Just one thing before my final statement. Do you think that October 7th was justified, the attack? And do you think civilians were targeted on that day?
I mean,
at least I'm glad he answered no to this, at least. Thank you.
If you separate it out, the part where they attacked Israeli military could be construed as an act of resistance, sure, but the part where they attacked civilians is completely unjustifiable. Of course, they attacked civilians. Of course, that's completely indefensible. So I think that's
good. Okay. I think that the big issue when this conflict is talked about is that it feels like people only ever want to tell one side of the story, that we can't have a conversation on why does the blockade exist? We can't have a conversation on what does Hamas do to induce civilian death, because Hamas wants civilians to die in Palestine more than Israelis do. Why can't we have a conversation about why?
I know you're going to get the last word. Do you mind if I interject on this point?
I can't believe I shouldn't have let him. I can't believe that I'm like 20 seconds into my answer after he just gave a 3-minute yap, and now I have to let him interject. Oh God, fuck me.
Human rights organizations have also, by the way, it was officially Israeli policy to use Palestinian civilians as human shields.
And then he brings up a whole other talking point. They've
done it in the West Bank for many years.
They've been arguing they have the legal right to do.
Yeah, they were arguing for it. The Israeli Supreme Court banned it. I mean, to do it.
The Israeli Supreme, crazy.
Yeah, hang on. I'm giving some context.
And then he's like, hang on, let me finish. I need to do this. I was like, bro, you're already interrupting my closing statement. What the fuck?
Just hear me out. This is a thought that I'm going to piece together that I think will be useful for you to think about a little bit.
Sure.
It was official policy. There was a case in which a Palestinian got killed because they do home raids in which the first person knocking on the door is the Palestinian, with the Israelis like standing behind them with the guns to try to get somebody to come out and cooperate and whatever. They don't want to be shot at. And when the Israeli Supreme Court tried to ban it, the Israeli military establishment was furious. Said this is a really important method of combat. It protects the soldiers' lives. You can't ban it. And Israel basically disregarded what the military establishment said. It was Shaul Mofaz, who was the defense minister at Israel at the time all of this was happening. I think it was in 2005. And even though the Supreme Court officially banned it, human rights organizations keep catching Israel engaging in acts of holding Palestinians as human shield in Gaza and the West Bank.
Is this my closing statement or his closing statement? I'm not even...
Last couple weeks.
Yes, it happened, and you see it like there's footage sometimes of holding a Palestinian with a gun over his shoulder.
That doesn't even make sense. Hamas
hang on,
kill them.
hang on, which is the point. You're making my point. Yes, very quickly. If the Israeli military thinks holding Palestinian civilians in front of them when they're fighting with Hamas saves the Israeli soldiers' lives, it tells you that they don't believe their own lies about Hamas wanting Palestinian civilians to die, because it would not be useful if that's what they believe. So you're actually making my point.
When the IDF was using those human shields, how many Muslims were killed? How many Palestinians were killed when they were?
This is the last question.
I think there was one incident of somebody getting killed.
One.
Yes. You know why?
Okay, so
because Palestinians don't want to shoot their own people. That's
so
why.
It's interesting. So the IDF's idea behind that was when they were engaged in this, when they were clearing out houses, the idea was that if a bunch of IDF soldiers show up and start banging on your door, it's going to lead to some sort of armed conflict. So what the IDF started to do is when they were clearing houses is no.
Still both interrupt. I think they're both interrupting my closing statement. What the fuck?
when they were approaching houses, if there were people in the neighborhood who were going by, they would say like, hey, do you want to walk up and do you want to knock on this door and talk to this guy? Because if you go in and you talk
With a gun to their head.
no, not with a gun.
To both of them still interrupting again.
That's not how.
Hey, do you want to hand me your wallet?
There's a reason why. Yeah, you can laugh, but this is the conflict, because you laugh now. More people probably die because that policy is gone, because the way that you phrase it is, oh, they held a gun to their head as a human shield, which I think did happen at the time. But there's a reason why when you talk about policy, only one person ever died doing it. It's because it was a safer way to bring people out of the home in order to have, like, you have an actual Palestinian go knock on the door rather than the idea of just banging the door.
Defending the use of human shields.
But I'm just saying,
another interruption.
Human shield is when you say
human who is shielding the other people.
no, it was to shield the IDF doesn't need shields from the Palestinians of the West Bank. So the IDF,
the Israeli military thinks it's human shields, but you don't.
The Supreme Court ruled against it because they felt like the ability for them to truly consent, the Palestinians to truly consent to knocking on a door, was compromised.
First it was non-consensual.
Another interruption.
Said,
yes.
Okay, fine.
Anyway,
We'll
so let me say, Steven, I want to give you time. Because Omar got a good chunk of time to get final thoughts. So I want to make sure that you get this.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, so there's just a refusal on one side. Well, really on both sides. We don't have any crazy ultra-Zionists here, except I guess maybe me. But generally, there's a refusal on both sides to acknowledge the truths of the other side. With the blockade, the reason why the blockade exists is because Israel is evil. Hamas doesn't actually do anything to induce civilians to be killed. Israeli people, Jewish people don't have any reasonable fears of Hamas. That's why earlier when I asked if Hamas was in charge of Israel and if the Jews lived in the Gaza Strip, do we think the treatment would be the same or worse or better? And we couldn't even get an answer there, because the obvious answer is Hamas would probably engage in a genocidal campaign to kill an actual genocidal campaign, not one where the people are on the verge of starvation for 25 years while the population increases fivefold. Okay, so this refusal to acknowledge like basic facts of history, or the fact that the complication is, or the conflict itself is really complicated. This goes back decades in terms of how people are disagreeing over who owns what piece of land, or who has a right to live in what place, or whether or not they're living under apartheid, or what a final solution should look like. The fact that people are incapable of acknowledging both parts of the sides of this conflict makes it so that when people are encouraging their particular side, there will never be a resolution. If you are a Palestinian and you believe that today you are being subjected to genocide and apartheid, why in the fuck would you ever negotiate with Israel for an thing? And I think both of you said yourselves, the international community needs to step in and solve this problem. And as long as Palestinians think that, there's never going to be a drive there to actually reach any lasting solution. Because why would you? If we're being genocided, we're being apartheided, we live in open air prisons and concentration camps, we're not going to figure the problem out. Somebody's going to come save us. And as long as that is the mentality that is given to the Palestinian people, they will continue to fight.
They should keep negotiating with their oppressors.
Or they can, where all of the, and this is funny too, you can see so many maps.
A minute.
Yeah, you can see so many maps that are published from negotiations between Palestinian negotiators and Israeli negotiators. All of them are from the Israeli side. There has never been a deal on the table where Palestinians said, this is what we want, and then Israel didn't accept. It's never been the case that was it.
The
negotiators
Israel.
have been horrible. Kushner's talked about a bus.
They recognize Israel. I don't know what more you want.
Every single person has talked about Arafat, about
Oh, interrupting my final statement again. Oh, thank you.
Negotiators have been horrible. Kushner's talked about a bus.
They recognize Israel. I don't know what more you want.
Every single person has talked about Arafat, about a bus. The negotiations just can never be made because there is no negotiating on the Palestinian side, and that's what we see today internationally. Yeah, that's just an encouragement to keep fighting until eventually you're one state from river to sea.
So we started this by saying we were not going to solve the problem, and I think that proved to be correct.
Yeah, that was a lot.
We did not solve the problem, but what we did say we wanted to do was bring some more clarity about the contrast on both sides, and I do think, Ryan, that we saw a lot of contrast and a lot more clarity in the contrast just by fleshing some of this out. So sincerely, sincerely want to thank both of you, because this is not always an easy thing to do, and we all are still here. So, on that note, Ryan, any final thoughts?
No final thoughts. I'll just leave it at that, because if I say anything, it's just going to nest right back up, and we've all got things we got to do, right?
That's right. So, breakingpoints.com to subscribe. We will be here, remember now, on Fridays in addition to Wednesdays. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Omar.
Hey, guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium.
Jesus, what a conversation. Illuminator Damien, he said that the talking time was, I spoke for 42 minutes and 42 seconds. Omar spoke for 52 minutes and 16 seconds, and then Ryan spoke for 12 minutes and 50 seconds. So combined, those two had about an hour and 5 minutes, and I had 43 minutes. Emily spoke for 7.5 minutes. I don't know whose side she counts on more, but Jesus. But I think I think my history is pretty strong. I think my talking points are pretty good. I just have to balance out the actual conversational strategy in terms of getting interrupted and shit like that. But I feel like this is probably one of my stronger conversations. I feel that way.